Airbnb Creature Sighting by Katie M. It was a cold March night, much more complicated than usual. My boyfriend and I decided to go into the hot tub in the back of our Airbnb that we were staying at. To be clear, we've stayed at this Airbnb before. Typically, we like to rent a room and the owners are typically there. They are good people. Maybe in their mid-60s. I never really thought to ask because I didn't want to, seem a little too prying. I know both of them were inside watching TV with their dog because I spoke with them on our way to the hot tub. The house is old, probably on 12 acres of land, and backs into a state park with a large lake. They have a decent-sized pond on their property which sits behind the house, just out of the reach of the lights on the house. While soaking in the hot tub, I felt weirdly like I was being watched. I flipped the way I was sitting so that instead of my back facing the property, it was now facing the house. About 50 yards away, a small section of trees is just before the pond. A light on the barn out there gives just enough light to hit the trees. Something caught my eye next to a tree. It stood on two legs and was as tall as the tree's lowest branch. I sat there for who knows how long just staring at it. My boyfriend could see that my look was very disconcerting and he could tell that I was freaked out. He asked me if I was okay. I couldn't really answer him. I slowly pointed my finger to the trees but kept it low enough that it wouldn't see. Of course, my boyfriend is blind and couldn't make out anything without his glasses. After what felt like hours but was only merely seconds, I told him we needed to go inside. I started to move slowly without losing sight of it, but when I lifted my leg out of the water, it looked at me. It was like it was a wolf and a dog hybrid. The eyes almost glowed. It ran like a dog on all fours into the darkness towards the pond. I'm not sure I've ever seen an animal run so fast in my God-given life. I never heard a splash into the pond or even leaves or twigs snapping. I grabbed my towel and sprinted for the door when, at the same time, the homeowner opened the door to come out and toss more wood into their wood heater. The dog and the owner were inside the home when I ran in. I told them what I saw and she quickly ran outside to visit with my boyfriend and the other owner. No one walked off the porch. Even the dog seemed a bit scared. The next day, I needed to know exactly how tall it was, so my boyfriend and I walked back up to the tree where it stood. My boyfriend is 6 foot tall and his arms straight up, he was probably still 6 to 8 inches away from touching the branch. The next night we returned to the Airbnb late around 10 p.m. The moment I stepped out of the car, I knew I was being watched and could hear a weird high-pitched sound that was beginning to hurt my head. I wasn't drinking that night and I don't do drugs, so I was 100% sober. It's been a few days and I'm back home now, but I'm still on edge. I feel like I'm constantly being watched. My home backs up to a small section of woods, and I can't even bring myself to let my dog out back or open up the blinds and face the back at night. I'm just too scared to see that creature all over again. Winter Weirdness by Sam. Hi, Swamp Dweller. I've been listening to you for almost 2 years now, and contemplating sharing some of my stories about my experiences. However, my sister told me I needed to share some of them, so I will share one of them now. If you'd like more from me, just let me know. For setup, I'm from Maine, and this takes place in the year of 2008, sometime during December in Jay, Maine. My sister was 6 and I was 8. We were looking for our cat. His name was Panda because he looked like a panda, but we couldn't find him anywhere in the house, so we thought he got outside again. We were kind of upset by this because he's really not an outside cat. He likes to think he is, but you know how animals are. It was snowing outside pretty badly, so we went to see if we could find him. We step outside to try and find any clues as to where he may have went. We do see what looks like footprints going into the woods, so we follow them. Now, these woods are set behind our house. They're not too far and they're not too thick, but they are pretty vast. We knew these woods fairly well because we had played in them several times. I had practically spent every day of the summer there. We had started walking and trying to look for them for about 20 minutes now. Or at least it felt like 20 minutes. As the weather picked up, the snow turned more into like a slight blizzard and we couldn't really see where we were going. So time perception was probably the last of my worries. My sister started to get scared and started crying. I told her we would be okay, make it back, and it'll all be fine. We eventually tried to turn around back toward the direction we thought the house was, but after some time we still hadn't gotten to the place, and I knew we were hopelessly lost, but I tried not to show it. I thought of a way to escape this storm and return to our home. Then, suddenly, the blizzard around us stopped blowing where we were standing, and about 10 feet around us, all I could see was calm snow. What I saw next, honestly, I've never heard or seen anything about it anywhere online in all my research. It's something straight out of this world. A wolf walks out of a blizzard around us. It was about 3 feet taller than I was, and I was 5 feet at the time. It was pure white. Its eyes were a beautiful full blue. I then heard a gentle, feminine voice say, "One of my blood, why are you out here?" I said we were looking for our cat, and as a kid I didn't know any better or what to do about a telepathic wolf. Then she said, "Come with me, little ones. Come on my back, I'll take you home. You are not safe out here." She crouched down, we climbed on her back, and we started running in the opposite way we were going. Also, the blizzard seemed to not be blowing at us as it stopped, but I could still see it raging around us. After some time, we see our house. She started to slow down and we came to the edge of the woods. She stopped, crouched, and then said, "Go home, little ones. You must go." My sister and I ran to the door. Once we touched the door, the storm returned, hitting us in full force. I looked back and the wolf was gone. We went inside and my mom ran up to us and asked us where we had been. She said we had been gone for multiple hours at this point, somewhere between 4 and 5. She was not alone though. There were 3 cops in the house talking to her at the time. We told them exactly what happened and why we were outside. She didn't believe us. She wrapped us in warm blankets and sat us next to our fireplace. If anybody knows what that wolf was, I'd love to know because I can't find anything on it at all. I think it might have been my spirit animal though. The Encounter at Cry Baby Bridge by Many Percentage 5331. So, it was mid-January, and my friends and I went on our monthly abandoned or scary car trip. One of my friends suggested we go to this supposedly haunted bridge called Cry Baby Bridge. Now, the Cry Baby Bridge is a common folklore motif of most of the Midwest, and although the bridges may be different in their stories, and although the bridges may be different geographically, their stories are very similar respectively. One concerns a young mother who drowned her unwanted child in the river under the bridge, and the infant's cries can allegedly still be heard to this day. Another familiar story is that a bus or a van full of children drove off a bridge, killing everyone inside. If you put your car in neutral while on the bridge, invisible hands are said to push you safely to the other side. These legends are associated with steel graffiti-covered bridges in rural Warren County. One tale in particular to this location involves a speeding car full of impetuous youth who struck and killed a fisherman as he cast a line into the creek. Several people have also heard a baby crying near this bridge. So we all got to this bridge somewhere around 3 in the morning, and it is exactly what you'd expect. It's dark, it's quiet, and it's creepy. Like the story goes, a steel bridge with a creek running under it. But with all of us there, we found something there. So I get out one of our new spirit boxes to communicate with the spirit we all felt on that bridge. As we attempted to talk with the spirits, we kept seeing shadows and hearing footsteps on both sides of the creek. At this point, we were getting very freaked out. Sometime around 4 in the morning, there was one thing that happened that I will never forget for as long as I'm on this earth. We were sitting in the middle of the bridge, my truck running with the lights on to keep the area lit around us. We were almost done with the session when we heard a loud splash noise out of nowhere, as if something had just jumped into the water below us. The source was on the right side of the bridge, and it went along with their legend of a body of a car falling into the water. We were so scared, that we scrambled into the truck and booked it out of there. We have not returned to that bridge since that day due to how scary and close that noise was and how interactive the experience was altogether. That's my story. I know it's short, and thank you for your time. I know it could have been some sort of fish or anything like that splashing, but the timing just made it all that much more creepier. Never Play with a Ouija Board by Caesar R. When I was 15 years old, some childhood friends and I were fascinated with paranormal things like ghosts, private base phenomena such as UFOs, etc., so we would sometimes venture out to such places and try to encounter something of our own. We discussed the mid to late 90s when intelligent phones did not exist, but digital gadgets were on the cusp of breakthroughs. Anyways, one day, a friend and I, during summer vacation, decided to get a Ouija board and go to another best friend's house and play with it. Everything went according to plan. In the morning we met up, obtained a Ouija board from a local supermarket, and went to our friend's house in the neighborhood we all grew up in. We gathered in his bedroom, turned the lights off, lit some candles, and began asking questions. It did move slightly, but we never got any full-on encounter or experience. So we said whatever, gave up, and continued our day of hanging out and enjoying each other's company during the summer vacation. We did typical teenage summer vacation fun stuff. This is where things honestly began to get weird. Around a week or so later, I was at my house, lying on my bed in my bedroom, sometime around 8 p.m. I was lying down, relaxing, listening to music, when suddenly I began to hear footsteps up my bedroom wall, outside of the house and across the roof quite quickly. Now my bed is against the wall, and I listened to the footsteps run up the same wall outside of where my bed was. It sounded like a child dashing. The length and span of each foot sounded like it was something that was small and bipedal, but incredibly fast. I was then quite surprised and didn't know what to do. I then went to the kitchen where my mom was washing the dishes at the time, and I asked if my stepdad was on the roof doing some maintenance or something. My mom was surprised at the question and said, "No, he's not up on the roof." I then returned to my room and thought about it for some time. Eventually, I did forget about it, falling asleep. But after thinking about it for some time, I do recall that later that night, when everyone was asleep and I had woken up late in the night, I would suddenly feel fear out of nowhere in my room, and suddenly would have sleep paralysis. It was crazy because when I felt the fear, it felt like a super fast rush of wind would race towards me and my body would go numb and paralyzed. My eyes rolled back sometimes, and it was always a level of fear and rage that I could not describe in human words. I honestly thought I might be having seizures for some time, but after visiting the doctor and not getting diagnosed with anything and all my levels seeming normal, it just made no sense. Such incidents would begin to happen about once a week and evolve to 2 to 3 times a week for about 4 years throughout my high school days. Then it got to a point to where one night I sensed the same fear enter my room while my whole family was asleep in their own respective rooms. Again, it felt like something rushed me and entered my body. First, my body arched, and I levitated to the ceiling, where my nose almost touched the top. Then my body slowly returned to the bed. I remember feeling everything and being able to see even through my eyes, even though they were rolled back into my sockets. I could handle the bed sheets over my body hanging, and I could see how I was levitating nearer and nearer to the ceiling, but eventually, like I said, I would end up back down. I know these experiences probably sound batshit insane. There was another incident where the same thing did occur. While I was paralyzed in such a state, I remember using all my force and energy, moving my head toward the door of my bedroom, because while I was paralyzed, it was super hard to move any body part, even my eyes. I couldn't move my mouth to scream, nothing. After looking at the bedroom door, I somehow mustered up the energy and motivation to be able to run and escape the horrifying experiences that I have continuously had to suffer through. I tried leaping off the bed to run for the door, and what I'm about to describe is absolutely unbelievable, but I am speaking from first-hand experience. My inner self, my soul or spirit, literally jumped out of my body. I hit the floor and started crawling as much as I could. I tried to get to the door. I tried to reach for the doorknob, but when I looked back to the bed, I saw my body paralyzed with my eyes rolling around. I couldn't believe it. Then, all of a sudden, my soul and spirit rushed back to my body and the entity left. The word terrifying does not begin to even describe what one feels in such an experience. I had an out-of-body astral projection type thing happen, but all I was trying to do was run away. Honestly, I don't even know how to really go on from here or to explain how I ever got over this. All I can tell you is, on other nights, my mom, stepdad, and siblings would go grocery shopping at night. I would stay home, watching TV, and at the same time in the living room I would hear about 15 to 20 feet away, something trying to get into the house, always jiggling the doorknobs, regardless if they were locked or not, but they would never come in. Sometimes I would feel a presence in the back of the house, but I never did dare to investigate. I learned my lesson. When these things were happening, every time I laid down in my bed sideways at night with my back facing the room and my face towards the wall, I would always hear people whispering in the room right behind me. When I turned around to see who was there, it would always dissipate, and the whispering would stop. I don't know what more to say other than thankfully years have passed and I am now a full-grown man, and those experiences and entities have dwindled. They still happen from time to time, but nowhere near as much. I started going to church, and luckily it slowly seems to have faded away. So to conclude, my advice, never dabble with a Ouija board. Scary Poltergeist Experiences by Reggie 420. I never believed in ghosts or the paranormal until I moved into my new home. The moment I stepped foot into that place, I felt a chill just run down my spine. The previous owners had done a lot of renovations, but something just honestly didn't feel right. It was when I started the upgrades myself that things began to truly get weird. At first, it was just small things. Doors creaking open on their own, lights flickering, and strange noises coming from the walls. I tried to ignore it the best I could, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then things began to get so much worse. One night, I was woken up by a loud banging on my bedroom door. I thought it was just some sort of burglar or prankster, so I got out of bed and opened the door, and nobody was there at all. I searched the entire house, and there was no sign of anyone. That's when I installed security cameras for obvious reasons. You always want to feel safe in your own home. The next day, I started to notice that things were moving on their own. Objects would fly across the room, cabinets would open and slam shut, the TV would turn on without any explanation, even when they were unplugged. It was clear that something was haunting my home. But what terrified me was how angry the poltergeist seemed. It wasn't just moving objects around, but throwing them with incredible force. Objects would fly off a shelf and hit the opposite wall, leaving a major indentation. It was entirely clear that there was something wrong, and it was very angry. I would hear things crashing against the walls, windows, and I could even feel the house shake at times. I tried everything to get rid of this poltergeist. I called in a priest, paranormal investigators, even a shaman, but nothing worked. The poltergeist was too strong and far too angry. When I started researching the house's story, I found out what had actually happened years ago. It turns out that the previous owners had a daughter who died in the home, and they had covered up her death. The poltergeist was likely her and her spirit, and she was furious. I tried making amends, leaving offerings, and trying to communicate with her, but it was useless. The poltergeist was too angry, too powerful, and ultimately I had no choice but to leave the house and let the angry ghost have it to herself. I never returned there, but I could still hear the poltergeist angry screams in my nightmares, seeing the objects being thrown, and every so often I swear I might have a little PTSD because I can feel my house shaking, but that could just be me tripping out. Anyways, thank you for sharing my story, Swamp Dweller. I know it might not be that long, but poltergeists are some serious, spooky stuff. I get heebie-jeebies just hearing the word poltergeist, and I don't want anybody to ever have to go through that. Haunted Asian Graveyard by Echo66. Hello there. I've listened to everything you do on YouTube and decided to submit this story which happened to me. There is this fantastic beach, very remote, that I had explored several times alone, and told my girlfriend Christine about it one day, and she decided she wanted to check it out. So, of course, I obliged and took her there. The beach was below a high cliff, and this abandoned Chinese graveyard was the only place to park our truck. I never understood why there was a graveyard way out there, because it wasn't near any of the towns, and there were no signs of any ghost town or human habitation anywhere around here. Those deceased that had loved ones had their remains exhumed and had their remains put into a newer cemetery in the city, so there were many open graves and the rest of them were still intact to the best of my knowledge. I was pretty excited to show Christine this beach. I loved this beach so much, and we had brought a picnic lunch and a cooler full of beer. So I pulled up into the graveyard and said let's go, but she refused to get out of the truck. I gave her a minute, but she just wouldn't move. I asked her what was up and why she was acting this way. She said there was something there. I always knew she had a bit of a sixth sense about her, but I had been to this place many times without any problems. So I leave my truck, go to her side, and try to see what she's looking at, to try to get an idea of why she's spooked. Just outside her door is an open grave with the top lid of a washing machine covering it. I lift the lid, and right then and there is a dead body in the grave. And it's fresh, not a body that's been buried in the graveyard, because this is an ancient, old, abandoned graveyard that hasn't had a new grave in several decades. I honestly freaked out like any normal person would and drove out of there. I was scared because we were witnesses to something that we were not supposed to see, and we had no idea if that person, perpetrator, or group of perpetrators were even around still. We eventually got to a place where we felt more comfortable. We talked to one of our family members, and then they said that we need to report this. So of course that's what we did. Once we got home after all of this, we decided to check the local newspapers and news every single day that week to see if we could see anything about it, if there were any updates, if they knew anything. And there was a report about a week later in the newspaper. So the official story goes like this. A man found out his cousin was cheating on his wife. So he invited him to come out to the sugarcane field that's not very far from that little cemetery we talked about. They were apparently going to smoke some ice, quote unquote. Apparently, sometime within that whole time span, he apparently killed the man and put him in that grave. And obviously we eventually found him a day or so later, and that's that. I always end up thinking about this story, and I've contemplated sharing it for a long time, and I'm glad I finally did.
So I live in a city, and one night I was with a girl. We are both middle-aged in our late 30s or early 40s at the time. I am now 48 years old. One night, her and I decided to go to a cemetery as lovers do. We have been to this cemetery a couple of times previously, always at nighttime though. This cemetery is rather big, and has two halves. Well, this night I decided to pull into the half we never went into together. I have been to this half plenty of times. I used to carry my flat-bottom boat to the pond that butts up to the cemetery to fish. So, this night we pulled in and exit the car. The weather was rather nice. It was a nice summer night, good conditions, stars in full bloom. We are standing at the hood of the car. We had not been out there for more than 5 minutes if I had to guess. Now, it is pitch dark outside, and there is no noise at all. No bugs, no cars in the distance. It was total silence. Just her and I. It was the only sound that we could discern. As we were standing there, I was getting ready to embrace her, and out of nowhere, we hear this deep growl. Now, I know how a dog's growl sounds, and this definitely was not a dog or a coyote. There is not much wildlife in this part of the city anyhow. This growl was in my face. It was not below my belt as if it were a dog or something. I stand 6 feet tall, and this growl was face level, and it penetrated through my chest. It was very vocal and strong. It was like a warning. I felt the growl go through my upper body. Without hesitation, we both immediately jumped in the car, and yes, I immediately hit the car lights as I was jumping in. I had to see what it was. because I just knew it was not anything of normalcy. When the lights were on, there was absolutely nothing there, just an empty cemetery. I could not believe what I was looking at. Something was literally eye level with me and gave me a warning of some sort, and then it just disappeared. It happened so fast, and how could it just be gone like that? Once in the car, I asked her what she thought about it. She said that she did not know, but that growl went through my entire body, and that she wanted to leave. Since that experience, I have not gone back in there, not even to fish. To this day, I still wonder what the hell that was. I don't think it was any sort of wildlife. Well, I hope this is a good story and makes your list. Either way, I will never forget this night.
I have had a couple of strange things happen to me in my lifetime. I have lived in both New Zealand and Australia, and I have had some weird experiences for both, but I want to talk about the two I experienced growing up, as I am 19 now and they have stuck with me ever since I can remember. The first story is the first paranormal thing I can remember happening to me. There have been a few now. I grew up in a rural area of New Zealand in the South Island. I was around 5 years old at the time this story happened. It was sometime around 7:30 at night, and I was playing with my dolls. As I sat there playing, I began to get that cold and uneasy feeling that often settles over you when you are being watched. Being a small child, I did not know exactly what to do, so I froze, my hands clenched around the dolls tightly. It felt like forever, as I sat there, waiting for the feeling to dissipate. But it didn't. It continued, until eventually from my closet, I heard the soft voice of a man say, "Hello?" I was immediately filled with fear. I muttered a quiet, "Hello?" back before I bolted to my parents crying hysterically, telling them what I had heard. They did not take my story too seriously, as I was so small. They chalked it up to a hyperactive imagination, and since it was past my bedtime, they thought maybe I was just sleep deprived. The other story comes from when I was 7 years old. This happened to me and multiple other people, but it still left me very jittery. This story happened at my primary school. Now, some important background information about my school. It was in a place in New Zealand called Tua Marina, and was situated below a cemetery on a hill, the site of which memorializes the event which took place in the area where at least 4 Maori people were killed in 1843 by British colonizers over a land dispute. That, and it is also a commemorative site for locals killed in the Boer War. It is a delightful spot for a primary school, I am aware. I was going into the bathroom during my lunch break when I stumbled across the older sister of one of my friends surrounded by her friends crying hysterically. The girls looked at me and were worried. They thought that I might tell the teacher. I cannot remember why exactly, so they asked me if I would keep a secret. And so the sister began to describe what had happened. She had been playing hide and seek with her friends in the wooded area of my school, the area closest to the cemetery on the hill. She had been hiding when she saw the shadow of a man on one of the trees opposite of her. When she turned to run, it began to whisper her name repeatedly, so she ran and found her friend who was the seeker, and when they went to see it again, the shadow was gone. Many years ago, when I was young and fit, I was out exercising before dawn. Our local cemetery was high on a hill. I would walk up the hill, then jog all around the concrete and gravel roads that wound in and around the graves. I had done this prior mornings, and I was not afraid of being in the graveyard pre-daylight. I had family and friends buried there. It was isolated, and I felt rather safe. One of the individuals interred there was a little girl named Kay. Kay was only 12 and starting junior high when an impatient idiot behind the wheel of a car killed her. On my frequent runs past Kay's well-kept grave, I often greeted her, wished her well,
expressed my sorrow regarding her short, sweet life. On this morning of which I write, I jogged past Kay's grave and called out my greeting. In my head, she spoke urgently to me. "It's not safe up here this morning." I jogged on, a bit startled. Of course, I glanced about, but all was normal. A few minutes later, Kay spoke again. "There's a man up here." This time I stopped. Suddenly, the dark hilltop seemed fraught with danger. My blood ran cold, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I know these things may sound like cliches, but they were no longer cliches in the moment. Still, I saw nothing. No man, no movement. But by now, every nerve in my body was screaming for me to get the hell out of there. I turned and ran. It was no longer a casual morning jog. It was a sprint for my life. I ran past Kay's grave back down the steep hill, caring not that my quadriceps complained. As I fled, I listened for any pursuers, and I heard none, but that did not lessen the overwhelming sense of peril that kept me running harder even after I exited the steep part of my route. The rest of that day, and even the remainder of that week, I listened for news of an escaped convict, a murderous madman, or anything that would explain Kay's urgent warning. But there didn't seem to be anything. I had no doubt then, nor do I have any years later, that I was in peril that morning. From whom, I don't know. But 15 years have passed, and I can still recall the crystal clarity those 2 sentences from a poor child, put much too early in her grave, gave to me. Maybe this sounds crazy, but this is my story, and I stand by it. So about 2 or 3 months ago, I was out and about with my mom, and while driving home, I asked if we could stop by a graveyard. We usually pass this graveyard when driving down one of our usual routes. It probably sounds weird, but to be honest, I just like taking pictures. Aesthetically pleasing pictures to be more exact. And as you probably know, if you find the right headstone and capture it from the right angle, you can get some cool shots. I wanted to get a few pictures just for kicks, and I would be on my merry way. My mom liked to take pictures too, so she came along with me to find some cool things to photograph. Now, I did not actually get anything paranormal in these pictures, but the story is strange all the same. Here's the layout. The story of this graveyard is a bit weird, and the graveyard itself is a bit small. It has got a gate surrounding it, and is in the middle of a suburban neighborhood. Strange placement, I know. I always wonder what the surrounding residents must have seen when they saw this being dug and created. Anyway, the graveyard has a paved road that makes a U shape and circles back around to the front. We drove down the noticeably short path and started from the back taking the pictures. This graveyard is old, so of course I got caught up in capturing the essence of the time-faded gravestones. Some stood up, some lay in the ground. My personal favorite is the one that used to have a carving of a lamb on top, but is now so old you can barely make out the shape. There are also a few graves that simply say infant or baby on them, and some graves that even date back to World War I. It was such an interesting experience. The whole thing was melancholy. As I approached the front area of the graveyard, I broke off from where my mom was to go look elsewhere. I found a couple of graves that sat in the ground, unkempt and dirty. Then I saw one grave, almost completely buried under a layer of dust, dirt, and cut grass. That is when the most intense feeling washed over me. It is hard to describe, but I felt scared in some way. Almost like someone yelled at me for something that I did, and maybe that is what happened. Either way, the feeling I got was not very welcoming at all. Whatever was there wanted me gone, and it wanted me gone then and there. I lingered for a second, feeling confused, but then I made a fast-paced walking effort back to my mom. I was on the verge of tears for literally no reason. I said to her, "We need to leave." She of course asked why, and I did not really give her a coherent response until I calmed down. felt like something did not want me there. It was not like a random thought that I had. I mean, I physically felt fear. My chest tightened up like it does when you get really scared, like when you were having a panic attack. I really don't know why, and trust me, I know exactly how panic attacks feel. I have had many panic attacks in my 14 years of life, and it very much sucks. I felt a little bit dizzy from whatever happened, to be honest, and it did not feel scared or anything anymore. It just felt like someone yelled at me for doing something wrong. At least, that is how I feel when I get yelled at. For anyone who is not as sensitive to anger as I am, it can probably feel a little bit different. This story is probably kind of underwhelming to read, but I have to say I was scared witless for several hours. I guess whoever was buried there wanted those pesky kids off their lawn. No hard feelings, I guess. I get mad whenever someone wakes me up too. Also, a bonus since I always look at the graveyard when driving by, the other day I saw something weird, and I have never seen anything paranormal there before. They have some standard garden hoses around the graveyard for keeping the grass green and nice, and a few columbariums on the side. When I was driving past there, I saw what looked like a transparent pair of legs walking. Once we passed the garden hose and columbariums, it was gone, and that was in about just a second's time. I did think it was just a person that was being partially obscured by the angle of the sun or something, but no matter how hard I looked in time, there's no way a person could have been gone that quickly. I did not see anyone there. I know it has to be a ghost. It wasn't an animal either. It sounds like standard ghost stuff to me, but still, it was creepy and I thought I would like to share it. Okay, so I had a rather creepy encounter a couple of months ago. It is not as intimidating as some of the others, but let me start off by saying I never would have believed in anything paranormal until that very night. Let me give you some backstory. I am a young female who still lives with my parents, and we partake in smoking pot on a daily basis. My mom had just gotten together with her now husband, I will call him Ron for privacy's sake, and we all need a nice safe place to toke without getting messed with. My mom still lived with her parents at the time, and they were fully against smoking. You know, those kinds of people who stay drinking every day and night, but smoking weed is a total abomination. Anywho, my mom and Ron had lived about 30 minutes apart from each other, so they would meet up every night to see each other. Conveniently, there happened to be a huge 2-mile cemetery directly across my mom's parents' house. We started visiting this cemetery every night, sometimes extremely late. This cemetery pretty much became a home to us. We even gave it our name and backstory. I ended up spending hours and hours roaming this cemetery, playing Pokemon Go, freestyling with my boys, and toking. Whether it was my ex who lived across the street from me or my parents, but one night, something changed my whole opinion on this cemetery. Me and my mom had decided to go out to the cemetery, and by we, I mean to get away from all the dudes. We get out of the car, in the back of the cemetery, and spark up. We were having a great time joking and taking pictures and walking around. I did not believe in spirits or anything at that time, so I was being ignorant, shouting things like, "If you even exist, get in the selfie with us. Hey ghost, come step up," taking pictures all over the place. Once we walked all the way to the pond and sat down, we were almost done smoking. All of a sudden, it got very quiet, and it was cold. There were no cricket sounds, no ducks quacking. Instantly, we heard an ear-piercing scream. It sounded like a little girl coming from behind us. It sounded like it shot all the way across the cemetery. It faded into silence, into nothing. We looked at each other in utter shock, with the "you heard that too, right?" look on our face. We bolted for the car, not even daring to look behind us. We floored it out of there. Let me mention, on the way out a good-sized rock hit the window. I may have been exaggerating, but something in my stomach turned. Not for the good either. I wish I could say that is where it ended. But remember when I said I took those pictures? When we got home, we sat on the sofa, kind of laughing about the ghost until we checked my mom's phone. And what was in our selfie will shock me to this day. It was a figure. Just a head. Floating. One picture is something wearing a hoodie. In the other, there's no hoodie. Just what seems to be like a zoomed-in head with long pointy ears. You would think I would not go back, but apparently that was not enough for me. I went back with my ex on foot, about 2 days after the incident, cell phone in hand. We got to the little lamb statue, where they bury the children. We started to hug and take pictures, joking around again. He mocked me, saying that I was lying about the incident I had with my mom, so I wanted to prove it to him. He got nervous, like a sudden wave of anxiety, and tried to pull me away from the statue. I finally convinced him to chill out, and we were taking selfies up to the point where we heard 2 claps. We kind of ignored it, brushing it off until we heard it again. We looked at each other, like, oh hell no, and started walking towards the entrance very quickly, which was about a mile away. Just as we turned to leave the statue and took a couple of steps, we heard more clapping. Loud, fast clapping. No breaks in between it at all this time. It appeared to be coming closer and closer as me and my ex were hauling ass out of there. We decided to not look at the photos. I wanted to have nothing to do with whatever I heard that night. Could it have been the same ghost from the picture from before? Could it have been random strangers? Who knows? I still go to that same cemetery every once in a while, not as much anymore since we moved in with Ron. I get uneasy every time I enter that cemetery though. Believe me, or not, that was a weird, strange, and downright nightmare-inducing experience. For the longest time, I was a tombstone caretaker for a cemetery in rural Georgia. It was only a summertime job for 16-year-old me. Nothing too crazy, just cleaning off the grime and built-up dirt from off of the tombstones and stuff. Now, to kind of set the scene a little bit. The cemetery included one building that housed bathrooms for the 5 caretakers employed by the cemetery, in addition to one small simple mausoleum. Other than that, it was just all flat earth with tombstones littering the entire site. The whole place felt pretty creepy, to be honest. It felt pretty cut off, as the surrounding place were some of the densest forests in the entire state of Georgia. Naturally, because of the eerie as hell surroundings, I was always a little bit more paranoid than maybe I should have been. And I watch a buttload of horror movies and such, so that probably gave me a pretty bad vibe as well, but I guess that's honestly the terrible combo for someone working in a cemetery. So one night, I'm doing my rounds when I have to go into the small mausoleum. We had some of the wealthier families in the area entombed within, and it was my job to go in, make sure all was neat and clean, making sure it met the standards of these uppity folks. I'm walking over to it, and right off the bat I feel like something is off. I could not quite put my finger on it at first, just this general sense that I was not alone. That's about the time I noticed candlelight coming from the small mausoleum. I was also pretty certain that I could hear voices coming from inside too, like younger voices, kids my age at the time. From what I could hear, it sounded like they were giggling, laughing, and it didn't sound particularly wholesome. Now, I had not seen anyone enter or leave the cemetery, but I also was not about to potentially take out a bunch of drunk teenagers on my own, as I definitely would get my ass kicked. So I called the lone security officer on duty, the dude that does a few rounds on the lot. He was an older guy, a retired cop, but he was definitely tough, and I knew he'd jump at the chance to help me out. When the ex-cop finally turns up, we both go inside. It was completely empty, which made absolutely no damn sense. I had literally just heard voices and stuff inside. There were indeed lit candles inside, burning around one of the tombs, a tomb that had been opened up to reveal the remains of a child-sized skeleton. Nothing other than that was disturbed though, but that stuff still was pretty creepy. mainly because the open tomb contained a rotten old child's doll, like the knitted kind. It was seriously disturbing to see. This old thing smiling away whilst lying hand in hand with an actual skeleton of a kid. Me and the security guard quickly got out of there, doing a lightning quick sweep at the grounds to try to at least get eyes on the sick assholes that desecrated that little girl's final resting place. Neither of us saw a soul, which was more frustrating than it was scary, and after a quarter of an hour, we met back at the mausoleum to set the girl's grave in order by sliding the stone tablet back on top of the tomb. But when we stepped inside, the doll that was previously hand in hand with the dead girl was sitting on the other side of the mausoleum. Like just sat there, upright, with that same uneven smile stitched across her face. Whoever was messing with us had actually gone back to move that doll to taunt us. I quit the
Footprints in the Ice by Boobius Hackred. I'll keep this short and sweet. A few years back, we were having a brutally cold winter. The snow had frozen into ice and covered everything. It was pitch black in the backyard when I let my dog outside one last time before bed that evening. As we exited the house from the sliding door of the walkout basement and onto the lower deck, I felt like something was off. Our home backs up to some woods, so I was accustomed to hearing noises from the wildlife at night. But this was different. Nothing made a sound except the cold Arctic wind, but I felt I was being watched. When my dog was in the backyard, I looked around nervously, expecting a coyote or a predator to pop out of the tree line. My dog did his business, but afterwards stopped and stared at a corner of the woods until I got creeped out and called him back inside. I quickly locked the sliding door and shut the curtains, unable to shake the uneasy feeling I had outside. Then, after double and triple checking all the locks in the house, I finally felt at ease enough to go to bed. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I hear the muffled sound of my dog barking from the basement 2 floors below. I got up, stumbled down 3 flights of stairs, and found him standing at the basement sliding door. He was peeking his head through the closed curtains, barking his head off with the hairs standing up all on his back. I tried calling him away from the door, but he would not let up. I dreaded peeking out the curtain to see what he was barking at, after the uneasy feeling I had from earlier in the night. Finally, I held my breath, swiped the curtain aside. I peered into the blacky inkness, but I saw nothing to cause any alarm. A wave of relief washed over me. I figured it must have been a deer or a raccoon in the yard that set him off. He whined at the door for a few more minutes until I bribed him upstairs with a dog cookie. After that, I went back to bed and wasn't disturbed again that night. That is, until the morning when I went to the basement to let out the dog. I opened the sliding door and walked out onto the deck as he bounded into the snow. When I looked down, my blood ran as cold as the sub-zero morning temperatures. A set of bare human footprints were frozen in the ice on the deck. They were obvious. I could make out each toe of the person's foot. The prints were large and appeared to be in the form of an adult, maybe a male. Looking around, I noticed they started at the base of the deck and disappeared off the side of the deck. I had my snow boots on, so I walked around the yard, but I could find no trace of the footprints in the snow once they left the deck. Keep in mind, the daily temperatures were at around 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind chill was close to 20 below. Frostbite would set in within a matter of minutes for anyone walking around barefoot, especially in the dead of night. I never experienced anything like that again, but I have adopted a second dog. My Ghost Story by Tater. These events started about 1.5 years before my youngest nephew was born, and the little bugger turned 1 year old 2 months ago. I mentioned last time that I'm a practicing witch. I don't broadcast it much, but I don't hide it as I used to do it in my youth. This has led to a few friends over the years coming to me for more specific advice, and a few surprised me since I need to get used to people taking me serious for this kind of stuff. My best friend's aunt, who I believe is some sort of Christian denomination, paid me for a home cleansing in one of the wards I've made for my own home. The story started with this type of interaction with my pregnant sister-in-law. She called me to tell someone about the weird stuff that had started happening around their home. After an old friend visited for a few days, she admitted that this individual had a more sketchy past from life decisions and drugs, and that they used to mess around with a Ouija board when they were younger. That was all I needed to hear, and I gave her my undivided attention. I have to love how a powerful divination tool is sold as a kid's toy. I've heard too many horror stories about them to even give it a try. Anyway, she told me about the strange electrical issues that started when she first got there, but what worried her the most was that it never stopped after she left. Lamps would stop working, for example, and one even popped a bulb in my older nephew's room out of nowhere. What got to her and made her call me was the string of bad luck that started small but soon escalated to my brother getting into a car accident. He was ultimately okay, but the car did not really, make it. It was totaled and they could not afford to replace it. She told me about a heavy feeling in the house, a sense of being watched. Around this time, my nephew started talking about the tall shadow in his room at night. When she told me about this, I was floored and confirmed her suspicions that something had been attached to her friend, who had decided to stick around. She was worried for her family, but the fact that she was pregnant, it cranked everything up to 11. It probably saw them as an easy target, causing stress to feed on the negative turmoil it caused. After the initial shock had faded, I was absolutely livid. I'm the type of person who doesn't care if you mess with me, but when you mess with my loved ones, it's a completely different story. She'd called asking for help, understandably on the more discreet side, so no cinnamon stick pentagram wraiths. She also didn't want to do anything that dealt with smoke for apparent reasons. I told her about simmer pots and simple sound cleansing, something she could do while I got things together for them in the meantime. She could go around the house banging on a bank and telling it to get out if needed. I made a protection jar in a small discreet glass jar smaller than a mason jar that she could place over her doorway or bury underneath her front porch. I also gave to her another small jar full of small tumbled pieces of obsidian. Those were for every entrance of the house, front and back doors, and windows for after she did the cleansing of her choosing. Simple. If it were, I wouldn't be typing this out at 1 a.m. when I can't sleep. I gave her the supplies at her baby shower a few weeks later. With all the friends and family there, I almost didn't pick up on the odd feeling that seemed to radiate from the closet in the corner to my sister-in-law. I'm a practitioner who loves crystals and makes jewelry, so I was discreetly protected from everything. At the time, I had let my anger get the better of me and challenged it to pick on someone their own size. Unfortunately, it did just that and followed me home. It took me a while to realize it, and also for it to get past my protections. Unfortunately, wards need to be refreshed and recharged after a period, and it was that time again. It started by going after me specifically at first, trying to scare me. In my previous story, I mentioned that I'm claircognizant. I often know things I cannot understand and even get quick flashes of impressions or over actual images in my head, like what a ghost looks like and what they're wearing, but I do not see anything with my eyes. This started by hanging back in the shadows before beginning to get a reaction out of me. Then, it liked to wait around doors so it would suddenly be in your face when entering a different room. It was skinny, dark, large, slightly sunken-in eyes and long limbs. It spent most of the time in a crouched position, even when moving around. It would only stand up straight when it hung down from the doorway so it could loom over you. I could deal with this and be happy to leave my family alone, but that lasted for only just a short time. Once it realized it wasn't going to get what it wanted from me, most of the time laughing at its attempts to get me, it found a new target. I currently live with my parents, with my partner of 12 years, and our 2 young daughters due to issues with the new landlords taking over where we had been renting for quite some time. None of the other adults mentioned anything when I noticed its absence, but it was around that time my oldest, 6-year-old, started having nightmares often and told me about the recent tapping on her window at night. After reassuring her and giving her one of my protection necklaces, I saw it go into their room one night after we had put them down. It was quick, but I still caught it, and it was smiling. I had been careless and arrogant to think that it would only come after me, and I had to get rid of it once and for all. I was going the whole 9 yards to make sure it couldn't find a metaphorical hole to hide in. After a ritual shower to prepare myself, I opened all the windows before taking down my wards to charge them before cleansing every part of my home. I'm sure it knew what I was getting ready to do because of what happened next. My partner and I sleep in the basement. The girls getting my old room. I gathered everything from around the house and started down the stairs to get things started when I felt a shove at my upper back. It didn't knock me over, but pushed me in a way to have me roll my ankle and then fall down the stairs on my knees and shins. The only reason I didn't just go tumbling ass over the tea kettle was because my death grip on the wood railing. I had gone about halfway down the metal-rimmed stairs before my grip had tightened enough to stop myself abruptly. It took me a minute or so to get my banged-up legs back under me to finish getting down. My legs were cut up pretty bad and would be covered in bruises for the next week or two. The worst part were the toes of my right foot, though. I had somehow slid down partly on the top of my foot before going the rest of the way down on my shin. My foot was absolutely killing me and swelled up for quite a few days after. After making it to my desk and chair, I let myself quietly freak out for a few minutes. That was the first time anything had ever outwardly attacked me, but it had also convinced me that I needed to finish my task and get it out of here once and for all. I wrapped my foot up with an ace bandage and kept on going. No, I did not get my foot checked out. I live in the US and there is a minimal amount of doctors to choose from that would do anything with toe or foot injuries without costing me $1 billion. I'll spare you the details, but after that, I haven't seen or felt that thing since. Even if I still can't curl my last 3 toes on that foot anymore. Thank you for your time, and I'm sorry that this got so long-winded. Greetings, Swamp Dweller. My name is Patrick. First off, I'd like to say that I love your show. I started listening and watching just a few weeks ago, while I was at work. I absolutely fell in love, and I thought I should share a story that has plagued my mind for years about the time I saw something unnatural, vicious, and thirsty for blood. Personally, I think it was a demon, but I'll let you and the viewers or listeners, whatever you want to call them, decide. I'd like to apologize for the length of this story as there is a lot of detail that follows what happened. Everything in this story is true. I wish it wasn't, but unfortunately, I must live with it for the rest of my life. This story takes place when I was 17 years old as a junior in high school in Salina, Utah. I only had 2 friends in high school because everyone I went to school with thought I was a freak because I have been able to see and communicate with spirits since I was a child. It's a small town, and everybody hears everything. My 2 friends, Logan and Ryan, and I were very avid paranormal investigators. We loved going all over our community, and our county in general, to investigate abandoned houses that were potentially haunted, and cemeteries rumored to be. Me being able to see and communicate with the dearly departed made the experience even more interesting. We decided to do something a little bit different this time, though. We heard rumors that there was a dark figure that roams a wooded park in the mountains of our area. We like to call the mountain Cryptid Mountain, for reasons I'll get into for another story. When we heard about this place, the 3 of us got excited and waited for the weekend so we could go investigate and see what was going on. Fast forward to the day of the event. Saturday came, and the 3 of us could not wait for nightfall to come. So, to pass the time, Ryan stole a pack of cigarettes from his father. His father smoked 3 packs a day and kept cartons of cigarettes in his room. We got in Logan's truck and headed to the park ahead of time to smoke them. You know, kid stuff. We sat in his truck and smoked almost half a pack in about 5 hours. As soon as the sun started to set, Logan started to get a strange feeling. He bent over, holding his stomach. "Guys, I have a really bad feeling about tonight," Logan stated. "Are you okay, man?" I asked as a concerned friend, patting his back. "He's fine, just being a pussy," Ryan replied before Logan could speak. Ryan was always a hothead and could be a complete and total jerk at times. Logan flipped him off and told him he was a dick, which I giggled at. After about 10 minutes, I asked Logan if he was ready to go and if he still wanted to do this. He replied with, "Let's do it, brother." His attitude surprised me. Just 2 minutes ago he was holding his stomach in pain. Now he's hyped up. I was so confused, but his hype got me excited.
We got out of Logan's truck and made our way to the destination. As we walked closer to the playground, we noticed that there was a man looking at us from a window of the supply shed. The three of us looked at each other in confusion, wondering why he was there. We later learned he was the groundskeeper, but more on that later. He looked scared, and it seemed like he was trying to tell us something while he mouthed something and pointed nervously. At first, we thought he was pointing at us, but we soon realized that he was pointing at the playground behind us moments later. Why doesn't he just open the door and tell us? I thought. So I decided I would go and see what he was trying to say. I made my way towards the window and shouted, "We can't hear you! What are you trying to say?" He made his way to the door and cracked it open and whispered, "Don't go into the playground. Something big and mean is over there. If you're smart, you'll just get out of here." Chills ran down my spine when he said this. He closed the door and backed away from the window into the dark of his shed, not breaking eye contact with the playground. I ran back to my friends and explained to them what the man had said to me. Logan got that feeling again, but Ryan expressed that the groundskeeper was probably just some sort of drug addict or something, and was probably just a big pussy like Logan and I. I told Ryan to shut up jokingly, and we made our way to the playground. Ignoring the warning from the frightened man, as soon as I set foot on the round pebble floor of the playground, I instantly felt, angry. I wanted to hurt someone. I wanted to hurt my friends. I wanted to kill them. I shook my head to focus on the task at hand and made my way to the tubed slide, forgetting that feeling. I made my way to the slide and investigated the bottom of the slide and saw nothing, but I could feel that there was something in this area. I looked back at my friends. Logan was combing the area for any evidence, and Ryan was on top of the playset. I stood back up and took one step from the slide. Then, something tripped me. It felt like someone had physically grabbed me by the ankle and pulled me to the ground. When I hit the ground, I let out a loud, "What the hell?" Logan ran over to me in a panic. "Patrick, are you—" He froze in mid-sentence as he looked up at the slide. I looked up at him and asked, "What's wrong?" He just pointed to the slide, jaw dropped and eyes filled with fear. I turned around and saw what he saw. It was a big, shadowed figure staring back at us. It let out a slow, snarled growl. I noticed its hands receding back into the shadows on the slide and saw that it was, wet and pitch black. These long claws were like fingernails almost. I freaked out and kicked away from the slide, trying to get to my feet. At last, when I got to my feet with Logan's help, I turned to Ryan and shouted for him to get off the playset. Ryan looked at the two of us and saw the fear in our faces. Then he saw something crawling up the slide. He didn't stay to find out what it was. Instead, he jumped from the highest point of the playset to the pebbled floor below. When he landed, Logan and I heard a loud crack from Ryan's foot. Later, we found out that he broke his ankle in 2 places when he hit the ground. Logan and I picked him up and ran back to the truck. The anger feeling I felt earlier was back as soon as I set Ryan in the truck. I grabbed Logan's baseball bat from the bed of the truck and made my way back to the playground. I know now that this was a stupid decision. Logan and Ryan yelled and cried for me to come back, but I didn't listen. I got back to the slide and searched for whatever it was that scared the living daylight out of us. It wasn't in the slide anymore, nor was it even on the playground. I searched for what felt like an hour, but was only a few short seconds. I looked over at the groundskeeper's shed and saw the door was open. I made my way over in a fury, thinking I was going to mess this thing up. When I got to the shed, the rage inside me left. My body was replaced with confusion yet again. The groundskeeper was gone, as if he was never there in the first place. I looked inside, but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I looked back at my friends in the truck to see them waiting in suspense. I felt as if something was breathing on my neck and froze in place like Logan did earlier. In fear, I slowly turned around to see something that will forever be etched into my mind. When I turned around, a shadowed face with piercing yellow bloodshot eyes stared back at me, snarling at me with this decayed and jagged-looking smile, drooling some nasty yellow liquid. I was in a state of paralysis. I couldn't move at all. Then, this thing let out a roar so ferocious it brought me back to my senses. I dropped the bat and ran back to the truck as fast as my feet could take me. When I got to the truck,
I hurried and jumped in and told Logan to get the hell out of there. After I got my breath back and Logan began to drive, I looked at both him and Ryan, and their faces were pale. I asked them what was wrong. This is what Ryan told me. Dude, when you were running back to the truck, something tall, thin, and black was running behind you, reaching out for you. I was speechless. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if it had caught me. Out of all the craziness and fear, we had Logan take Ryan to the ER. After the hospital visit and Ryan's extremely angry dad, we all went home. The next morning, Logan called me and asked if I went back to the park. I said no. Why? Confused. Because this morning I was getting ready for my early morning run, and when I opened my front door, my bat was sitting on my porch with scratch marks all over it. My heart dropped. I remembered dropping his bat at the park by the shed. I never went back to get it. What Logan said next still haunts me. It had this yellow stuff dripping from it. Later, we found out that the groundskeeper we thought we saw that night died of a massive heart attack in that same shed 10 years prior to our investigation. I know this because we did some digging and we found an article and an obituary. 2 years later, I learned the shed was torn down by the city for safety reasons, and they will not disclose why to the public though. I'd love to read some comments as to what you guys think this was. Thank you for reading my story, Swamp Dweller. When I have the time, I'll share some more tales from Cryptid Mountain. For some people, this may seem far-fetched, but I can assure you this is real. So basically, I have been a sufferer of sleep paralysis for 10 years. I am 28 years old currently. I can sometimes get it up to 10 times in one night, to the point that I don't sleep at all, and believe me, it is exhausting. So I went to a friend who is a healer, and we have done a range of past life regressions and full moon rituals. I now also have begun to practice Wicca, which is not what people think. Nothing at all witchy, it's spiritual and protecting. Since I have found myself and become open to being an empath, I have been seeing voids every night before bed. Then recently, they have shown up in other places. It's like a strange black shifting, like smoke, that I can feel is a void or like a dimension, if that makes any sense. Sometimes it feels bad, as though something is trying to get through, but cannot due to the protecting crystals, sage, spells, and other powerful objects I have around me in my bedroom. I have begun to hear very loud ringing and voices in my head when I sleep, to which it wakes me up because I feel like things are trying to get to me. So, one night of course, I can astral project, so I decided to see if I could find my spirit guides and ask what is happening, when instead, I come face to face with what I can only describe as a sleep paralysis demon. The one who has taunted me for years, making me feel like he was licking my neck and entering me when he felt like. It basically felt like being assaulted by the vilest thing you could ever imagine. His skin is a shade of green, his hair all bushy and black, and his face, I can't explain at all if I am honest, due to mental blocks. He began to laugh as though he had finally had the opportunity to take over my body. Through research, sleep paralysis isn't real, so I started to think, well, how can I feel and see this thing? And if it weren't real, why couldn't I move? So all of this is flowing through my head. I managed to repeat my sage spell, which helps to cleanse your room and house. Air, fire, water, earth. Cleanse, dismiss, dispel. Over and over. Then, I kid you not, the fear I felt was unreal. If you don't believe what I'm saying, I do not care. But out from the darkest corner, my spirit wolf Nuka leaped out and dragged this hideous thing behind me, tearing his arms from his shoulder and socket, taking it away, out of my sight. Nuka is bright white with yellow eyes. He's been my spirit wolf for the last few years since I went to a past life and found him. He helped me let go of a few things, especially things that were hurting my soul. He then came back, looked at me, and nodded, and was gone. I found my body again through the darkness. This was over a month ago, and I have not seen that vile paralysis demon again. For anyone that suffers,
I would always advise you to contact your spiritual guides and sage your bedroom every night. The protection is unreal, and has helped me more than anything else has. I hope you enjoyed my story, even though I know it was more unconventional than most. I think there is a demon or a ghost following my family. I'll start with saying that I'll have to send this in a couple of parts, so it isn't too long. And I apologize, this has been something that's followed me my entire life, but I'll share the most impactful or strange moments. I haven't told many people this, but since it's anonymous, well, why not? I don't know where to start. This began before I was born with both my mother and my father. When my mom was young, she said there was only one time she felt true evil. She was young and living with her parents at the time. She awoke randomly and saw this tall, slender black humanoid thing standing at the end of her bed. It wasn't sleep paralysis because she went under her covers and screamed for her parents. She didn't tell me much more about it or anything. She didn't really tell me about her other experiences before she passed away either. My dad is very reluctant on sharing his sightings because he has always been told that it was nothing. I've been slowly getting more and more out of him over the years though. Getting on with my personal encounters though. First odd thing that's happened to me was when we moved into our third house. When you walked into the front door, there was the living room down the hall and on the right, and the dining room and kitchen to the left. You go to the living room and there's one hallway with 3 bedrooms and the bathroom. My parents on the left and the rest on the right, and one at the very end. Anyway, both my siblings that lived with me were sleeping in the living room in the sleeping bags because of the move, and my mom and stepdad were sleeping in their room. When my older sister and I woke up, we ran to the back room, which was the one we were arguing about, to see who gets it, because it's the biggest one. When we opened the door to the closet, on the inside to the left of the door, there was a crudely drawn face in Sharpie that looked like a half dog, half human thing. My sister immediately yelled at me for trying to scare her out of getting that room, because that wasn't there the day prior, and no one else went in the room. I know for a fact that I didn't draw it, and when I finally convinced her of that, she said we shouldn't take it off, because it might anger whatever did it. She is a strong believer in ghosts. I wish I still had the picture, but I lost the phone as this was over 13 years ago. Another time, in the same house, my sister and her best friend were exploring the attic, which was off limits, and no one ever went up there because they thought it was very creepy. Not even my parents. Well, they discovered some boxes and ran off to tell my stepdad when he got home. He went up there and immediately ran down and called the landlord to take them out of the house right now. He didn't even want to touch the boxes that were up there and refused to tell us what they were. Now when I ask him, he pretends like that never happened, which is infuriating because I'm very curious. Anyway, if you're interested in more stories with this demon or ghost that followed my family, I have a couple of other things that has happened that I cannot explain and might be paranormal. Hello, Swamp Dweller. I'm a long-time listener, and this is my first time sharing a story. I love your channel as it helps me de-stress and distract me from my anxieties. I'm 36 years old, and this happened around the age of 5 or 6 in Wallingford, Connecticut. We live in a large 3-story brick and wooden house constructed sometime in the 1800s, adjacent to a thick set of woods which was the perimeter of our backyard. We used to play in these woods often as kids, riding BMX bikes, playing paintball, just normal kid stuff. As far as critters go, we didn't have anything too serious to worry about, other than the occasional black bear, but normally just deer, fox, woodchucks, and your standard woodland creatures inhabited our property. I was very familiar with the wildlife we shared space with, even at that age. My bedroom happened to be the only one facing the backyard towards the woods, and my bed was parallel to a sliding glass window with no screen. One night I had sat up wide awake to the sound of the window next to my bed being smashed from the outside in. Shards of glass spewed all over the desk under the window, and the floor next to my bed as if a stuntman was just jumping through the window or some sort of SWAT team breaching a door. The next thing I saw will forever be burned in my memory. Now, bear with me. This is going to sound, well, different. But I will describe this as thoroughly as I can. A small, brown and scaly claw-like hand grabs the side of the window and leans a face that I will never forget. The first thing I notice are two bulbous, yellow glowing eyes with pupils locking onto mine, like laser-guided systems. The intense and bulging eyes sat upon a sickly thin face, which I can only describe as a goblin. Its wrinkled skin was a grotesque fecal brown, ridden with black porous-like holes. An exaggerated pointed chin hung under a grimace of gnarly, rotten yellow teeth, mangled, looking like a mako shark. This thing bared its teeth with an evil smile, its huge, pointed nose wrinkled and gigantic, flappy ears cringed back so its head looked like an agitated dog. Very slightly, this ugly little, whatever you want to call it, lowered his head while maintaining eye contact, revealing a set of recurved black horns, looking like that of an impala. It was roughly 2 to 3 feet tall, as I saw the entire outline of its being, squatting on my windowsill. This goblin thing, and I, locked eyes. I saw it advance towards me about 1 millimeter, and then the memory completely cuts off there. The next thing I know, I am being reprimanded by my parents for breaking my window, as there was glass all over my desk and floor. They did not believe me about the goblin. I don't really blame them, I guess, as I was a very young child at the time, but I do know what I saw. I was wide awake and this was not a dream. I've investigated this as much as I possibly could and found some possibilities as to what it could have been. There are 2 cryptids that have similar appearances, the duende and something called brownies. Problem is, duendes are normally in South America and brownies are in Europe. I was in Connecticut. Duendes are a little smaller than what I saw, and brownies are said to wear clothes. As this goblin thing was naked, I do plan on getting hypnotic regression to revisit this memory, as well as my out-of-body experience, and maybe something else. But this one hit me the hardest. Was it a goblin, or could it have been some sort of demon or something? Aside from the goblin-like features, the darn thing looked like the devil. It's a lot to get into, but I suspect that this might be the case, and I might have had an attachment to this thing. I think it possibly feeds off my negativity. I honestly wonder if it somehow jumped into me. If you want a visual representation of what this thing kind of looked like, search for the band Necrogoblicon. The singer wears a mask that looks very close to what I saw, only it was brown and with recurved black horns. Thanks again for allowing me to share this experience. I don't know of anyone else who has ever seen a goblin or some sort of demon, but I do feel at home sharing it in the swamp.
Footprints in the Ice by Boobius Hackrid. I'll keep this short and sweet. A few years back, we were having a brutally cold winter. The snow had frozen into ice and covered everything. It was pitch black in the backyard when I let my dog outside one last time before bed that evening. As we exited the house from the sliding door of the walkout basement and onto the lower deck, I felt like something was off. Our home backs up to some woods, so I was accustomed to hearing noises from the wildlife at night. But this was different. Nothing made a sound except the cold Arctic wind, but I felt I was being watched. When my dog was in the backyard, I looked around nervously, expecting a coyote or a predator to pop out of the tree line. My dog did his business, but afterwards stopped and stared at a corner of the woods until I got creeped out and called him back inside. I quickly locked the sliding door and shut the curtains, unable to shake the uneasy feeling I had outside. Then, after double and triple checking all the locks in the house, I finally felt at ease enough to go to bed. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I hear the muffled sound of my dog barking from the basement 2 floors below. I got up, stumbled down 3 flights of stairs, and found him standing at the basement sliding door. He was peeking his head through the closed curtains, barking his head off with the hairs standing up all on his back. I tried calling him away from the door, but he would not let up. I dreaded peeking out the curtain to see what he was barking at, after the uneasy feeling I had from earlier in the night. Finally, I held my breath, swiped the curtain aside. I peered into the blacky inkness, but I saw nothing to cause any alarm. A wave of relief washed over me. I figured it must have been a deer or a raccoon in the yard that set him off. He whined at the door for a few more minutes until I bribed him upstairs with a dog cookie. After that, I went back to bed and wasn't disturbed again that night. That is until the morning when I went to the basement to let out the dog. I opened the sliding door and walked out onto the deck as he bounded into the snow. When I looked down, my blood ran as cold as the sub-zero morning temperatures. A set of bare human footprints was frozen in the ice on the deck. They were obvious. I could make out each toe of the person's foot. The prints were large and appeared to be in the form of an adult, maybe a male. Looking around, I noticed they started at the base of the deck and disappeared off the side of the deck. I had my snow boots on, so I walked around the yard, but I could find no trace of the footprints in the snow once they left the deck. Keep in mind, the daily temperatures were at around 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wind chill was close to 20 below. Frostbite would set in within a matter of minutes for anyone walking around barefoot, especially in the dead of night. I never experienced anything like that again, but I have adopted a second dog. My Ghost Story by Tater. These events started about a year and a half before my youngest nephew was born, and the little bugger turned a year old 2 months ago. I mentioned last time that I'm a practicing witch. I don't broadcast it much, but I don't hide it as I used to do it in my youth. This has led to a few friends over the years coming to me for more specific advice, and a few surprised me since I need to get used to people taking me serious for this kind of stuff. My best friend's aunt, who I believe is some sort of Christian denomination, paid me for a home cleansing in one of the wards I've made for my own home. The story started with this type of interaction with my pregnant sister-in-law. She called me to tell someone about the weird stuff that had started happening around their home. After an old friend visited for a few days, she admitted that this individual had a more sketchy past from life decisions and drugs, and that they used to mess around with a Ouija board when they were younger. That was all I needed to hear, and I gave her my undivided attention. I have to love how a powerful divination tool is sold as a kid's toy. I've heard too many horror stories about them to even give it a try. Anyway, she told me about the strange electrical issues that started when she first got there, but what worried her the most was that it never stopped after she left. Lamps would stop working, for example, and one even popped a bulb in my older nephew's room out of nowhere. What got to her and made her call me was the string of bad luck that started small but soon escalated to my brother getting into a car accident. He was ultimately okay, but the car did not really, make it. It was totaled and they could not afford to replace it. She told me about a heavy feeling in the house, a sense of being watched. Around this time, my nephew started talking about the tall shadow in his room at night. When she told me about this, I was floored and confirmed her suspicions that something had been attached to her friend, who had decided to stick around. She was worried for her family, but the fact that she was pregnant, it cranked everything up to 11. It probably saw them as an easy target, causing stress to feed on the negative turmoil it caused. After the initial shock had faded, I was absolutely livid. I'm the type of person who doesn't care if you mess with me, but when you mess with my loved ones, it's a completely different story. She'd called asking for help, understandably on the more discreet side, so no cinnamon stick pentagram wraiths. She also didn't want to do anything that dealt with smoke for apparent reasons. I told her about simmer pots and simple sound cleansing, something she could do while I got things together for them in the meantime. She could go around the house banging on a bank and telling it to get out if needed. I made a protection jar in a small discreet glass jar smaller than a mason jar that she could place over her doorway or bury underneath her front porch. I also gave to her another small jar full of small tumbled pieces of obsidian. Those were for every entrance of the house, front and back doors, and windows for after she did the cleansing of her choosing. Simple. If it were, I wouldn't be typing this out at 1 a.m. when I can't sleep. I gave her the supplies at her baby shower a few weeks later. With all the friends and family there, I almost didn't pick up on the odd feeling that seemed to radiate from the closet in the corner to my sister-in-law. I'm a practitioner who loves crystals and makes jewelry, so I was discreetly protected from everything. At the time, I had let my anger get the better of me and challenged it to pick on someone their own size. Unfortunately, it did just that and followed me home. It took me a while to realize it, and also for it to get past my protections. Unfortunately, wards need to be refreshed and recharged after a period, and it was that time again. It started by going after me specifically at first, trying to scare me. In my previous story, I mentioned that I'm claircognizant. I often know things I cannot understand and even get quick flashes of impressions or over actual images in my head, like what a ghost looks like and what they're wearing, but I do not see anything with my eyes. This started by hanging back in the shadows before beginning to get a reaction out of me. Then, it liked to wait around doors so it would suddenly be in your face when entering a different room. It was skinny, dark, large, slightly sunken-in eyes and long limbs. It spent most of the time in a crouched position, even when moving around. It would only stand up straight when it hung down from the doorway so it could loom over you. I could deal with this and be happy to leave my family alone, but that lasted for only just a short time. Once it realized it wasn't going to get what it wanted from me, most of the time laughing at its attempts to get me, it found a new target. I currently live with my parents, with my partner of 12 years, and our 2 young daughters due to issues with the new landlords taking over where we had been renting for quite some time. None of the other adults mentioned anything when I noticed its absence, but it was around that time my oldest, 6-year-old, started having nightmares often and told me about the recent tapping on her window at night. After reassuring her and giving her one of my protection necklaces, I saw it go into their room one night after we had put them down. It was quick, but I still caught it, and it was smiling. I had been careless and arrogant to think that it would only come after me, and I had to get rid of it once and for all. I was going the whole 9 yards to make sure it couldn't find a metaphorical hole to hide in. After a ritual shower to prepare myself, I opened all the windows before taking down my wards to charge them before cleansing every part of my home. I'm sure it knew what I was getting ready to do because of what happened next. My partner and I sleep in the basement. The girls getting my old room. I gathered everything from around the house and started down the stairs to get things started when I felt a shove at my upper back. It didn't knock me over, but pushed me in a way to have me roll my ankle and then fall down the stairs on my knees and shins. The only reason I didn't just go tumbling ass over the tea kettle was because my death grip on the wood railing. I had gone about halfway down the metal-rimmed stairs before my grip had tightened enough to stop myself abruptly. It took me a minute or so to get my banged-up legs back under me to finish getting down. My legs were cut up pretty bad and would be covered in bruises for the next week or 2. The worst part were the toes of my right foot, though. I had somehow slid down partly on the top of my foot before going the rest of the way down on my shin. My foot was absolutely killing me and swelled up for quite a few days after. After making it to my desk and chair, I let myself quietly freak out for a few minutes. That was the first time anything had ever outwardly attacked me, but it had also convinced me that I needed to finish my task and get it out of here once and for all. I wrapped my foot up with an ace bandage and kept on going. No, I did not get my foot checked out. I live in the US and there is a minimal amount of doctors to choose from that would do anything with toe or foot injuries without costing me $1 billion. I'll spare you the details, but after that, I haven't seen or felt that thing since. Even if I still can't curl my last 3 toes on that foot anymore. Thank you for your time, and I'm sorry that this got so long-winded. Greetings, Swamp Dweller. My name is Patrick. First off, I'd like to say that I love your show. I started listening and watching just a few weeks ago, while I was at work. I absolutely fell in love, and I thought I should share a story that has plagued my mind for years about the time I saw something unnatural, vicious, and thirsty for blood. Personally, I think it was a demon, but I'll let you and the viewers or listeners, whatever you want to call them, decide. I'd like to apologize for the length of this story as there is a lot of detail that follows what happened. Everything in this story is true. I wish it wasn't, but unfortunately, I must live with it for the rest of my life. This story takes place when I was 17 years old as a junior in high school in Salina, Utah. I only had 2 friends in high school because everyone I went to school with thought I was a freak because I have been able to see and communicate with spirits since I was a child. It's a small town, and everybody hears everything.
My two friends Logan and Ryan and I were very avid paranormal investigators. We loved going all over our community and our county in general to investigate abandoned houses that were potentially haunted and cemeteries rumored to be. Me being able to see and communicate with the dearly departed made the experience even more interesting. We decided to do something a little bit different this time though. We heard rumors that there was a dark figure that roams a wooded park in the mountains of our area. We like to call the mountain Cryptid Mountain, for reasons I'll get into for another story. When we heard about this place, the three of us got excited and waited for the weekend so we could go investigate and see what was going on. Fast forward to the day of the event. Saturday came, and the three of us could not wait for nightfall to come. So, to pass the time, Ryan stole a pack of cigarettes from his father. His father smoked 3 packs a day and kept cartons of cigarettes in his room. We got in Logan's truck and headed to the park ahead of time to smoke them. You know, kid stuff. We sat in his truck and smoked almost half a pack in about 5 hours. As soon as the sun started to set, Logan started to get a strange feeling. He bent over, holding his stomach. "Guys, I have a really bad feeling about tonight," Logan stated. "Are you okay, man?" I asked as a concerned friend, patting his back. "He's fine, just being a pussy," Ryan replied before Logan could speak. Ryan was always a hothead and could be a complete and total jerk at times. Logan flipped him off and told him he was a dick, which I giggled at. After about 10 minutes, I asked Logan if he was ready to go and if he still wanted to do this. He replied with, "Let's do it, brother." His attitude surprised me. Just 2 minutes ago he was holding his stomach in pain. Now he's hyped up. I was so confused, but his hype got me excited. We got out of Logan's truck and made our way to the destination. As we walked closer to the playground, we noticed that there was a man looking at us from a window of the supply shed. The three of us looked at each other in confusion, wondering why he was there. We later learned he was the groundskeeper, but more on that later. He looked scared, and it seemed like he was trying to tell us something while he mouthed something and pointed nervously. At first, we thought he was pointing at us, but we soon realized that he was pointing at the playground behind us moments later. Why doesn't he just open the door and tell us? I thought. So I decided I would go and see what he was trying to say. I made my way towards the window and shouted, "We can't hear you! What are you trying to say?" He made his way to the door and cracked it open and whispered, "Don't go into the playground. Something big and mean is over there. If you're smart, you'll just get out of here." Chills ran down my spine when he said this. He closed the door and backed away from the window into the dark of his shed, not breaking eye contact with the playground. I ran back to my friends and explained to them what the man had said to me. Logan got that feeling again, but Ryan expressed that the groundskeeper was probably just some sort of drug addict or something, and was probably just a big pussy like Logan and I. I told Ryan to shut up jokingly, and we made our way to the playground. Ignoring the warning from the frightened man, as soon as I set foot on the round pebble floor of the playground, I instantly felt, I don't know, angry. I wanted to hurt someone. I wanted to hurt my friends. I wanted to kill them. I shook my head to focus on the task at hand and made my way to the tube to slide, forgetting that feeling. I made my way to the slide and investigated the bottom of the slide and saw nothing, but I could feel that there was something in this area. I looked back at my friends. Logan was combing the area for any evidence, and Ryan was on top of the playset. I stood back up and took one step from the slide. Then, something tripped me. It felt like someone had physically grabbed me by the ankle and pulled me to the ground. When I hit the ground, I let out a loud, "What the hell?" Logan ran over to me in a panic. "Patrick, are you—" He froze in mid-sentence as he looked up at the slide. I looked up at him and asked, "What's wrong?" He just pointed to the slide, jaw dropped and eyes filled with fear. I turned around and saw what he saw. It was a big, shadowed figure staring back at us. It let out a slow, snarled growl. I noticed its hands receding back into the shadows on the slide and saw that it was, like, wet and pitch black. These long claws were like fingernails almost. I freaked out and kicked away from the slide, trying to get to my feet. At last, when I got to my feet with Logan's help, I turned to Ryan and shouted for him to get off the playset. Ryan looked at the two of us and saw the fear in our faces. Then he saw something crawling up the slide. He didn't stay to find out what it was. Instead, he jumped from the highest point of the playset to the pebbled floor below. When he landed, Logan and I heard a loud crack from Ryan's foot. Later, we found out that he broke his ankle in 2 places when he hit the ground. Logan and I picked him up and ran back to the truck. The anger feeling I felt earlier was back as soon as I set Ryan in the truck. I grabbed Logan's baseball bat from the bed of the truck and made my way back to the playground. I know now that this was a stupid decision. Logan and Ryan yelled and cried for me to come back, but I didn't listen. I got back to the slide and searched for whatever it was that scared the living daylight out of us. It wasn't in the slide anymore, nor was it even on the playground. I searched for what felt like an hour, but was only a few short seconds. I looked over at the groundskeeper's shed and saw the door was open. I made my way over in a fury, thinking I was going to mess this thing up. When I got to the shed, the rage inside me left. My body was replaced with confusion yet again. The groundskeeper was gone, as if he was never there in the first place. I looked inside, but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I looked back at my friends in the truck to see them waiting in suspense. I felt as if something was breathing on my neck and froze in place like Logan did earlier. In fear, I slowly turned around to see something that will forever be etched into my mind. When I turned around, a shadowed face with piercing yellow bloodshot eyes stared back at me, snarling at me with this decayed and jagged-looking smile, drooling some nasty yellow liquid. I was in a state of paralysis. I couldn't move at all. Then, this thing let out a roar so ferocious it brought me back to my senses. I dropped the bat and ran back to the truck as fast as my feet could take me. When I got to the truck, I hurried and jumped in and told Logan to get the hell out of there. After I got my breath back and Logan began to drive, I looked at both him and Ryan, and their faces were pale. I asked them what was wrong. This is what Ryan told me. Dude, when you were running back to the truck, something tall, thin, and black was running behind you, reaching out for you. I was speechless. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if it had caught me. Out of all the craziness and fear, we had Logan take Ryan to the ER. After the hospital visit and Ryan's extremely angry dad, we all went home. The next morning, Logan called me and asked if I went back to the park. I said no. Why? Confused. Because this morning I was getting ready for my early morning run, and when I opened my front door, my bat was sitting on my porch with scratch marks all over it. My heart dropped. I remembered dropping his bat at the park by the shed. I never went back to get it. What Logan said next still haunts me. It had this yellow stuff dripping from it. Later, we found out that the groundskeeper we thought we saw that night died of a massive heart attack in that same shed 10 years prior to our investigation. I know this because we did some digging and we found an article and an obituary. 2 years later, I learned the shed was torn down by the city for safety reasons, and they will not disclose why to the public though. I'd love to read some comments as to what you guys think this was. Thank you for reading my story, Swamp Dweller. When I have the time, I'll share some more tales from Cryptid Mountain. For some people, this may seem far-fetched, but I can assure you this is real. So basically, I have been a sufferer of sleep paralysis for 10 years. I am 28 years old currently. I can sometimes get it up to 10 times in one night, to the point that I don't sleep at all, and believe me, it is exhausting. So I went to a friend who is a healer, and we have done a range of past life regressions and full moon rituals. I now also have begun to practice Wicca, which is not what people think. Nothing at all witchy, it's spiritual and protecting. Since I have found myself and become open to being an empath, I have been seeing voids every night before bed. Then recently, they have shown up in other places. It's like a strange black shifting, like smoke, that I can feel is a void or like a dimension, if that makes any sense. Sometimes it feels bad, as though something is trying to get through, but cannot due to the protecting crystals, sage, spells, and other powerful objects I have around me in my bedroom. I have begun to hear very loud ringing and voices in my head when I sleep, to which it wakes me up because I feel like things are trying to get to me. So, one night of course, I can astral project, so I decided to see if I could find my spirit guides and ask what is happening, when instead, I come face to face with what I can only describe as a sleep paralysis demon. The one who has taunted me for years, making me feel like he was licking my neck and entering me when he felt like. It basically felt like being assaulted by the vilest thing you could ever imagine. His skin is a shade of green, his hair all bushy and black, and his face, I can't explain at all if I am honest, due to mental blocks. He began to laugh as though he had finally had the opportunity to take over my body. Through research, sleep paralysis isn't real, so I started to think, well, how can I feel and see this thing? And if it weren't real, why couldn't I move? So all of this is flowing through my head. I managed to repeat my sage spell, which helps to cleanse your room and house. Air, fire, water, earth. Cleanse, dismiss, dispel. Over and over. Then, I kid you not, the fear I felt was unreal. If you don't believe what I'm saying, I do not care. But out from the darkest corner, my spirit wolf Nuka leaped out and dragged this hideous thing behind me, tearing his arms from his shoulder and socket, taking it away, out of my sight. Nuka is bright white with yellow eyes. He's been my spirit wolf for the last few years since I went to a past life and found him. He helped me let go of a few things, especially things that were hurting my soul. He then came back, looked at me, and nodded, and was gone. I found my body again through the darkness. This was over a month ago, and I have not seen that vile paralysis demon again. For anyone that suffers, I would always advise you to contact your spiritual guides and sage your bedroom every night. The protection is unreal, and has helped me more than anything else has. I hope you enjoyed my story, even though I know it was more unconventional than most. I think there is a demon or a ghost following my family. I'll start with saying that I'll have to send this in a couple of parts, so it isn't too long. And I apologize, this has been something that's followed me my entire life, but I'll share the most impactful or strange moments. I haven't told many people this, but since it's anonymous, well, why not? I don't know where to start. This began before I was born with both my mother and my father. When my mom was young, she said there was only one time she felt true evil. She was young and living with her parents at the time. She awoke randomly and saw this tall, slender black humanoid thing standing at the end of her bed. It wasn't sleep paralysis because she went under her covers and screamed for her parents. She didn't tell me much more about it or anything. She didn't really tell me about her other experiences before she passed away either. My dad is very reluctant on sharing his sightings because he has always been told that it was nothing. I've been slowly getting more and more out of him over the years though. Getting on with my personal encounters though. First odd thing that's happened to me was when we moved into our third house. When you walked into the front door, there was the living room down the hall and on the right, and the dining room and kitchen to the left. You go to the living room and there's one hallway with 3 bedrooms and the bathroom. My parents on the left and the rest on the right, and one at the very end. Anyway, both my siblings that lived with me were sleeping in the living room in the sleeping bags because of the move, and my mom and stepdad were sleeping in their room. When my older sister and I woke up, we ran to the back room, which was the one we were arguing about, to see who gets it, because it's the biggest one. When we opened the door to the closet, on the inside to the left of the door, there was a crudely drawn face in Sharpie that looked like a half-dog, half-human thing. My sister immediately yelled at me for trying to scare her out of getting that room, because that wasn't there the day prior, and no one else went in the room. I know for a fact that I didn't draw it, and when I finally convinced her of that, she said we shouldn't take it off, because it might anger whatever did it. She is a strong believer in ghosts. I wish I still had the picture, but I lost the phone as this was over 13 years ago. Another time, in the same house, my sister and her best friend were exploring the attic, which was off limits, and no one ever went up there because they thought it was very creepy. Not even my parents. Well, they discovered some boxes and ran off to tell my stepdad when he got home. He went up there and immediately ran down and called the landlord to take them out of the house right now. He didn't even want to touch the boxes that were up there, and refused to tell us what they were. Now when I ask him, he pretends like that never happened, which is infuriating, because I'm very curious. Anyway, if you're interested in more stories with this demon or ghost that followed my family, I have a couple of other things that has happened that I cannot explain and might be paranormal. Hello, Swamp Dweller. I'm a long-time listener, and this is my first time sharing a story. I love your channel as it helps me de-stress and distract me from my anxieties. I'm 36 years old, and this happened around the age of 5 or 6 in Wallingford, Connecticut. We live in a large 3-story brick and wooden house constructed sometime in the 1800s, adjacent to a thick set of woods which was the perimeter of our backyard. We used to play in these woods often as kids, riding BMX bikes, playing paintball, just normal kid stuff. As far as critters go, we didn't have anything too serious to worry about, other than the occasional black bear, but normally just deer, fox, woodchucks, and your standard woodland creatures inhabited our property. I was very familiar with the wildlife we shared space with, even at that age. My bedroom happened to be the only one facing the backyard towards the woods, and my bed was parallel to a sliding glass window with no screen. One night I had sat up wide awake to the sound of the window next to my bed being smashed from the outside in. Shards of glass spewed all over the desk under the window, and the floor next to my bed as if a stuntman was just jumping through the window or some sort of SWAT team breaching a door. The next thing I saw will forever be burned in my memory. Now, bear with me. This is going to sound, well, different, but I will describe this as thoroughly as I can. A small, brown and scaly claw-like hand grabs the side of the window and leans a face that I will never forget. The first thing I notice are two bulbous, yellow glowing eyes with pupils locking onto mine, like laser-guided systems. The intense and bulging eye sat upon a sickly thin face, which I can only describe as a goblin. Its wrinkled skin was a grotesque fecal brown, ridden with black porous-like holes. An exaggerated pointed chin hung under a grimace of gnarly, rotten yellow teeth, mangled, looking like a mako shark. This thing bared its teeth with an evil smile, its huge, pointed nose wrinkled and gigantic, flappy ears cringed back so its head looked like an agitated dog. Very slightly, this ugly little, whatever you want to call it, lowered his head while maintaining eye contact, revealing a set of recurved black horns, looking like that of an impala. It was roughly 2 to 3 feet tall, as I saw the entire outline of its being, squatting on my windowsill. This goblin thing, and I, locked eyes. I saw it advance towards me about 1 millimeter, and then the memory completely cuts off there. The next thing I know, I am being reprimanded by my parents for breaking my window, as there was glass all over my desk and floor. They did not believe me about the goblin. I don't really blame them, I guess, as I was a very young child at the time, but I do know what I saw. I was wide awake, and this was not a dream. I've investigated this as much as I possibly could, and found some possibilities as to what it could have been. There are 2 cryptids that have similar appearances, the duende and something called brownies. Problem is, duendes are normally in South America, and brownies are in Europe. I was in Connecticut. Duendes are a little smaller than what I saw, and brownies are said to wear clothes, as this goblin thing was naked. I do plan on getting hypnotic regression to revisit this memory, as well as my out-of-body experience, and maybe something else. But this one hit me the hardest. Was it a goblin? Or could it have been some sort of demon or something? Aside from the goblin-like features, the darn thing looked like the devil. It's a lot to get into, but I suspect that this might be the case, and I might have had an attachment to this thing. I think it possibly feeds off my negativity. I honestly wonder if it somehow jumped into me. If you want a visual representation of what this thing kind of looked like, search for the band Necrogoblicon. The singer wears a mask that looks very close to what I saw, only it was brown and with recurved black horns. Thanks again for allowing me to share this experience. I don't know of anyone else who has ever seen a goblin or some sort of demon, but I do feel at home sharing it in the swamp. An experience I won't forget. By Caleb. I recently found your show and have really enjoyed the chilling stories you share. However, I have made a point to stick to more of your cryptid and camping stories, as my wife and I only do ghost stories after one gets a little too real. I don't understand what happened, but getting other opinions might help us make more sense of it. My wife and I dated for 2 years over a long distance while I was out of state for school. And when I finished, we finally decided it would be best to have a face-to-face relationship. I moved her into my hometown, and starting from scratch with nothing, we moved into my sister's old room. Her family and I are all devout Christians, and her father was a Bible professor at a local university, so I never thought something like what occurred would happen. My girlfriend, now wife, had told me that her family had a few run-ins with paranormal occurrences over the years, and I knew that her father had pagan and Christian relics in his office. Still, I never thought much about it, as I had never experienced anything abnormal. That changed when one evening in the fall, we talked after dinner and told each other ghost stories we had heard over the years. Again, I never experienced anything paranormal and never thought I would, but I found the stories chilling and exciting. I don't know if we talked about this subject too long that night or what happened, but I think I said something along the lines of, I almost wish I'd experienced a haunting, for whatever reason, but we should have taken these stories more seriously than we did. We all went to bed like usual that night, and my wife and her sister went to my wife's room, her parents went to their room, and the dogs in the living room. It left me alone in my sister's room. Her sister's room was unfamiliar to me and a little unnerving, as she had a lot of old dolls from her childhood on the shelf facing the bed. So I typically left the door open where all the hall lights could shine in. I could feel in the back of my mind that I was still half asleep, so I spent a few seconds trying to get my eyes to focus and my mind to start fully working. By the time I was completely conscious and out of my fog, the figure was no longer there. As if I had blinked and it was gone. Thoroughly spooked, I chalked it up to being half asleep and seeing things and tried to go back to sleep. Later that next day, my wife and I were going about our day, and I could tell that something was really off. She wasn't as upbeat and seemed more on edge than usual. Whenever I would ask about this, she would attribute it to something else that was going on entirely. On a hunch, I told her about what I had seen and experienced that past night, trying to make it out as a joke. She didn't laugh, but looked right at me and told me something had also happened to her. She told me that at one point during the night she got cold and tried to pull her heavy comforter over her more fully, but it felt like it was stuck on something. She pulled and began calling out her sister's name, who was sleeping on the floor nearby. They turned on the lamp on the nightstand and saw that the corner had been tucked into one of the drawers of the nightstand. This would seem innocent enough, but the nightstand was a half a foot away from the bed and definitely wouldn't happen naturally. This has never happened before, and never has it happened since. From the best my wife and I could figure out, what she experienced and what I had must have happened around the same time of night and correlated together somehow. I told her father the next day, and he and I went and examined the area of the hallway where I saw the figure. There was nothing noteworthy that we could find outside of this relic-filled office that was behind a door. I lived there for quite some time after this and didn't really experience anything else that I could really mention to you, nor did any of the family pets act abnormally. However, from then on, my wife and I stopped watching movies or telling stories about the paranormal. My hopes in writing into your show today, Mr. Swamp Dweller, is that somebody listening to this in the comments may have something similar they've experienced. Someone else may have some insight into what may have happened that night, although I'm not sure I want to know. This is the first time I've typed this story out or gone over it thoroughly, and I dearly hope this was a good decision. Haunted Apartment by Tal. Hello, Swamp Dweller. I just started watching your show last week and have been enjoying your videos. Here is one of my stories I would like to share. For some time, I lived in a third world country in South Asia while I was a missionary for the churches from 2017 to 2019. It was early on in my service, and I shared an apartment with 3 other missionaries. Our apartment was pretty beaten up and definitely old. About a month before I arrived, the woman who lived next door sadly committed suicide. When my roommates told me this, I didn't really overthink it. But over the first week living there, we all noticed a change in the overall vibe in our place. It seemed to be darker, colder. We were all pretty lighthearted and laid-back people, but the vibes were just off. One night, while laying in bed, we heard a strange noise. For context, our apartment had a spacious living room, a dining room, and a small kitchen in the front of the apartment. Turning left would lead you to the back, where you would find 2 rooms and 2 bathrooms. There was also a room that was connected to the kitchen. It was boiling and humid, and we only had 1 AC fan installed in the more enormous back bedroom. So we all moved our beds in there to sleep, each one of our beds against the room's 4 walls with the door in the corner. So we began to hear noises coming from outside our room. We would hear footsteps as well as the switches to the fans being turned on and off repeatedly. One night, we even heard our iron fall to the ground. When we ran out to see what happened, it wasn't right next to the ironing board, but it was on the kitchen floor as if someone had thrown it. We were pretty freaked out, but none of us were ever alone, seeing that this was a rule that we agreed and followed for our 2 years service that we never broke. We were always with our companion. Me being the youngest and the one with the least experience, I was pretty scared. Not to mention homesickness, I come from a middle-class family in a small town on the west side of the United States, so I was beginning to feel pretty depressed and have a sense of someone watching me. One of the other missionaries in my apartment was a native of this country and only had 2 months until he went home. We will call him D. He noticed my depression and took me under his wing. The other 2 people were from England and California, respectively. I was companions with the British missionary, who we will call B, and we will call the 4th J. So one night, as we were all sleeping, D had woke up from a cold breeze. He looked over at my bed and swore he saw a woman in a shawl hovering over my bed. He tried to yell and get up from his bed, but could not move or speak, almost like he was in some sort of paralysis. He was terrified. The woman sat there looking at me and stroking my face. She suddenly looked up at D, and he blacked out. The next day he told us what had happened. I believed him, and B and J did not. Fast forward 2 months of similar spooky things going down, and D eventually leaves and goes home. N from Utah arrives, and we become friends instantly. One day I told them about the woman next door, and he was skeptical about her ghost haunting us. But as time went by, with continued unexplainable things going down, we all felt kind of eerie. One evening, the property manager is in the apartment next door cleaning. We hear him talking and a woman's voice is replying. However, it was all said in one of the country's 20-plus languages, which we did not speak. Suddenly, he runs out of the apartment. We go up to the roof, as we were not allowed to explore the city that night, and watch him from above as he goes to a cemetery a block away and jumps over the gate. He begins digging things up and running around the cemetery like a madman, screaming. We had no idea what to do and eventually just went inside, occasionally hearing him and others yelling. This man then left and we never, ever saw him again. I think he quit. A few weeks later, we were still hearing noises and footsteps, and then one day the dead woman's son came, packed up all her stuff, and left. As soon as he did, we all felt like lighter. It felt like everything just basically stopped. The strange occurrences were no more, and the apartment was all like brighter. It's hard to explain. I believe that woman's ghost was haunting the apartment and the building and the people and all that good stuff. I have many more stories from before my time in this country that would go well with your other featured content, but I'll send those in at another day. Always Be Aware and Alert by Dame W. Hey everyone, I am 19 years old and I live in the very southeast area of Washington State near the Blue Mountain Range. The story took place in a valley I used to live in and live less than 45 minutes away from it to this very day. This story took place when I was around 12, and it's not the most intense story, but trust me, it still leaves me terrified to this day, and I swear I can still see this thing every once in a while at the corner of my eye. Anyways, I have been listening to Swamp Dweller's stories for quite some time when it made me feel the same dread as I did that day when coming across this thing. I had been walking home in a very well-lit and populated area where I live. I walked down the final street before turning onto my family's private road. As I was walking, I was crossing the street that came off Main Street to my house, but then I felt dread that I had never felt before wash over me. So I stopped in the middle of the dark, but it was lit by a streetlight when I started making a complete 360 of my surroundings. That's when my gaze came upon the dark side of the street that I was standing at the top of. At first I stood there scared and sweating bullets, looking for anything to explain how I felt, but there was nothing to attribute it to. So even through my dread and paranoia, I took about 10 steps toward the pure darkness. Just then every feeling became 10 times worse. I stopped and I was just waiting for anything to happen, anything to show itself. But eventually I saw something in the orchard next to me, just a bit ahead. It was on all fours. It was utterly dark, like it was made of shadows, standing about 3 to 4 feet. Then, as soon as I saw it, I felt like it looked towards me with no facial features. Just pure darkness. I was petrified. I can't even explain the feeling that it made me feel. It turned to the road, bolting so fast that it was unreal. When it ran to the road, I got a more detailed look at this thing. Being more scared than ever, nothing, even my terrible experience, made me feel as fearful as I was when I saw the figure so clearly. But as soon as it bolted across the street, it also disappeared instantly, like it was just a flash. Like it had just become a part of the light around us, like it was never there at all. I couldn't figure out what I saw that night, and I just started running to my house, never stopping, about a half mile all the way. I was out of breath, my lungs were on fire, my legs were aching, but I could not. I just could not look back behind me. I don't know what I saw that night, and even with all the stories I've listened to on the Swamp Dweller channel or anywhere online, I cannot find anything similar. If anybody listening to this story has any idea what I may have seen, please let me know in the comments.
In 2009, I was interested in the paranormal, since I had many paranormal experiences growing up. I found a website that held ghost tours at the old Southwestern General Hospital. I was excited and ready to go on a ghost hunt. The group that held the ghost tour was named Ghost, or Ghost Hunters of South Texas. The group was professional, and they used many of the items that paranormal researchers used at the time. Before the tour, they showed us proof that they have captured in previous investigations while investigating the property. EVPs included a little boy saying, "Play with me, please," and a woman with a southern accent responding to questions. The woman is said to be in an old-time dress, and sometimes old-time nurse attire. After the tour, the group said they were having openings for new members, and the new members would be tested and would be considered in maybe being part of the new team. I was quick to join and try out. I made the team. The team would have private group ghost hunts, so we would have the building to ourselves. The third floor was used as a hospice type of area. The building has 4 floors. The first, second, and fourth floor were left abandoned, and they looked like a scene out of a horror movie. Hospital beds lay in rooms dusty and unused. Many had dates from 1995 and before. I even found a death log that had many names and dates. The most active areas were the 4th and 2nd floor. The 4th floor had a baby nursery, and many rooms that were once used for families that would be welcoming new babies. One EVP that was caught in that area was one of crying babies. At the time the EVP was caught, there were no babies in the building, and it was after midnight sometime when it was caught. Also on the 4th floor, there was a long hallway with empty patient rooms. In that hallway, shadows were always seen running or moving. The 2nd floor was an old area. Also, many shadow figures were seen in this area. When doing research on the deaths in the building, I came up with what looked like to be a nurse who was crushed to death when a malfunction with the elevator happened years ago. During the time I was a part of this group, we investigated this building tons of times. I might even care to say maybe over 100. I also led ghost tours in the building with other members. I witnessed shadows, disembodied voices, screams, and one time heard a female humming a song only to find the room empty and dark. I've seen videos of doors opening on their own with no wind or people in the building. Also, the 3rd floor had employees that would see things and hear things very often.
Patients also complained of a kid running in their room or a man standing over their bed just looking at them, only to disappear. Over the years, I gained experience and loved what I did. As a group, we investigated many places such as schools, homes, and cemeteries in El Paso. We also got to investigate the old Asarco smelter before it was demolished several years later. I got to ghost hunt with people from Ghost Hunters and Ghost Hunters International. I met many celebrities and the group had them take their own personal ghost tours. It was fun and I grew a thick skin for fearing anything that goes bump in the dark. One of my favorite places to investigate was Southwestern General Hospital. I never believed in being followed home. One night after investigating, I was at my apartment eating on my couch and watching TV. I had my hallway light on near the front door that was visible from where I was sitting. Suddenly, from the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow of a person on the wall near the door. I turned and saw the shadow in full form. It was about 6 foot tall and completely black. Then, not even a second later, the shadow moved as if it was running down my hallway to my bedroom. I froze in horror, thinking somebody was in my apartment. I got up and walked to my bedroom. Nobody was there. I searched the whole house up and down, and then I thought to myself, maybe I'm just going crazy. I soon went to bed a few minutes later. It was probably about 3:20 a.m. when I felt my bed shaking. I woke up to my sheets being pulled off me very slowly and deliberately. I tried to move, but I just could not. My sheets slid very slowly off me towards the floor. I could not move, and I started to hear growling in my right ear. From the corner of my eye, I could see something moving near my head on the right of me. It was on my pillow. I could only see from the peripheral vision that it had hair. It was hairy and brown. If I could compare it to something, I would say Chewbacca from Star Wars type hair. It was moving, very slowly, but obviously very deliberately. It was growling as well. My eyes started to water up with tears. I tried to move my arm, but I just couldn't. I could only move my fingers. The blanket was still being pulled off me little by little until it hit the floor and I was no longer covered by my sheet. I felt the hairy thing moving right next to me, and the growling grew louder. Then suddenly, I was able to sit up and I turned and looked to see what was there next to me. The hairy thing was gone, but I could see the imprint of where it had sat, right next to me just a moment ago. It was the size of a full-grown cat. Then I looked around the room to gather my sanity. I don't own a cat. My sheet was on the floor, and my eyes were still watery. I asked myself, maybe it was just sleep paralysis. I found it hard to sleep that night, since I lived alone in that apartment. The next day I had a girl over to my apartment. I was seeing her from school. I was playing PlayStation and she asked if she could take a nap in my bed. I said of course. She went to my bed and fell asleep. Around 20 minutes later, she suddenly came back to my living room in tears. She said, I have to leave now. I asked her what was happening and what was wrong. What she said shocked me. She said that something shook the bed and woke her up. She could not move, and then something was growling and started getting close to her ear. Then the bed went down as if somebody lied down next to her. She tried to scream for me and could not. Then she felt as if somebody was breathing on her neck as the growling grew louder. She said it lasted about 2 minutes, and then she was finally able to move. Once she was able to move, she ran to me in the living room. After she explained this, I grabbed her stuff and helped her leave. I did not tell her what happened to me the night before, but I had that same exact experience, and what happened to her was enough proof that something was not right. I could not explain what was happening. First thing that came to mind that something probably followed me home from the hospital. After a few days, all the activity suddenly stopped. Only when I would go in on investigations, I would see shadows in my apartment, and then they would just go away. I loved what I did, and the only time I feared the paranormal was this moment. I no longer ghost hunt, and the group no longer gets together. Southwest General Hospital was purchased and is now remodeled and is in use. I can only imagine what the employees of the LTAC go through by being in that building. Every now and then I drive down Cotton and pass the building. I miss the days of being part of Ghost El Paso. If you are ever in El Paso after stopping by at Chico's Tacos, be sure to pass by the old building by the Star on the Mountain, formerly known as Southwest General Hospital.
To start this story, we need to jump back to 2013. My husband and I were separated, and I would often pull away from everyone in my life. All in all, I was extremely lonely and dealing with a lot. My therapist recommended meeting new people through meetup groups, so I gave it a shot. I joined a paranormal meetup group and attended my one and only ghost hunt. Overall, it was kind of silly, but the inn that hosted the event is historically beautiful. The place also has a tragic backstory of an unsolved murder of 2 teenage girls in the 1970s. I was traumatized at this point in my life, so a lot of the details are blurry, but basically, we split into small groups and explored the small property. We then conducted Ouija board sessions. I was surprised when we experienced activity. You are probably thinking that it was all a setup. I would have too, but the activity was directed at me. The first thing that happened was through the EVPs. A childhood nickname that I have not used in many decades was said. Then, another name was repeated multiple times through the EVP and through the Ouija board. And finally, my name was spelled when asked who they are talking to. The other name was common, and it meant nothing to me at the time. The next morning, I learned the suicide of one of my cousins. I'd grown up with this cousin, and we had been extremely close through childhood. Living on opposite sides of the country, though, we had not seen each other in such a long time. She had taken her life while I was on my hunt. The name that played on repeat was her father's. She had passed when we were children. I feel like my uncle was reaching out, using childhood nicknames to warn me of the death of my cousin. I have not shared my story before, but I do have this one interesting experience that I have not been able to come up with an explanation for ever since it happened. I like to think of myself as a cynic when it comes to the paranormal. I want to believe in it. However, I'm not religious and will not convince myself until I know for certain that there's no scientific explanation for the happenings, and this is the closest I can think I have ever gotten. My family decided we should go on an organized ghost hunt at the neighboring town. It was late at night and there were 3 sections to this. The first involved using a Ouija board type thing with a glass. Nothing happened on this one. The second involved trying to reach out to spirits in a dark room. Nothing happened in this one either. The experiences come from the third section, which was an incredibly old courtroom, and we used technology. Firstly, there were digital thermometers set up, and one of our family members was sat below one. These thermometers flashed when temperatures spontaneously dropped from room temperature, supposedly a sign of ghost. Suddenly, this family member jumped up, sort of spooked, and moved seats while the organizers were explaining to us what we were going to do. He proclaimed he felt something very cold and tingly. Lo and behold, the thermometer was also flashing and showing exceptionally low temperatures right by where he was sat. That was odd enough, but the second experience was just as odd. I was in a room by myself with my uncle. I had an EMF meter that lit up in the presence of an electromagnetic field. I do not know how these devices work, but I do know that they do. However, I do not know how legitimate the specific one I was holding was. I have my own at home, and it does react to real electrical sources such as my PC and plug outlets, etc. The other device I was using was something called the spirit box, which was supposed to detect words ghosts were saying and read them out. This device did not convince me at all, and I'm still not fully convinced by it, but it certainly was curious. I also was asking questions, and the EMF meter was flashing in accordance with these questions. It seemed to work, but there was no telling whether it was legitimate or not. However, I wanted to push the boundaries of yes and no questions to see how realistic it actually was. If a ghost was real, surely it can answer any binary question if I gave it 2 options, and the corresponding number of flashes on the EMF meter for the answers, not just a yes or no. So I did. I asked aloud, "Are you a man or a woman?" Flash 1 for man, flash twice for woman.
At the time, I was not convinced this would work as I was skeptical. However, the EMF meter flashed twice. And then, within 5 seconds of that, the spirit box displayed and read out the word female. Two completely independent devices simultaneously confirmed the answer I supposedly got. That was a big deal for me, and still is to this day. I could not figure out an explanation for that, and the two devices remained consistent for the entire session. I truly hope for the existence of something beyond life, and I hope this was my first glimpse at some actual proof for myself. I would like to start by saying that while I am interested in the paranormal, I tend to be skeptical and prefer to think things out rationally before dismissing every little thing as a ghost or the like. This experience, however, has no logical explanation I can think of. I am new here, and as well, I apologize in advance if I'm not doing this correctly. So, let's get into this. I was 17 and it was mid-October, nearing Halloween. My family had gone to a small, rural town to meet up with some good friends. We were going to get dinner and catch up for old time's sake, as my siblings and I had grown up with the children of the other families. After dinner, the parents stayed at the bar drinking, and those of us who were not of legal drinking age were starting to get a little bored. That is when one of my friends brought up the local cemetery. Apparently there is a cemetery in this town that is said to be haunted. I'm pretty positive that some ghost hunter paranormal type show did an episode about it or something, but the legends are said to have been around since before that. The story goes that a group of teenage boys were wandering into the graveyard one Halloween night with the intention of causing trouble and maybe stirring up some spooky ghost action in celebration of Halloween. After messing around for a while with no unexplained phenomena, they decided to sit in on top of the mausoleum, which is basically just a big tomb built up around a coffin instead of burying it in the ground. They were about to call it quits and head home when suddenly, unseen hands seemed to push one of the boys off the top of the tomb and into the ground. All the boys were obviously scared and hightailed it out of there, all of them feeling an eerie, ominous energy following them around for weeks after the incident. There have also been numerous reports of orbs, headstones inexplicably moving or disappearing altogether, ghostly apparitions, inscriptions being changed, flashes of light, strange noises, the whole works. I, of course, was more than excited to check it out. We arrived at the cemetery well after dark, and one of my girlfriends, we will call her Emma, and I were the only two brave ones enough to go in. We hopped right out of the car, careful to be as inconspicuous as we could since we did not want the police showing up and ruining our ghost hunting experience. We headed toward the entrance. It was chilly and a bit windy, as autumn in Wisconsin tends to be. We gripped each other's hands and started down the gravel path. As soon as we passed the fence that surrounded the plot of land, everything seemed to get very still and very quiet. We could not even hear the wind anymore, which was strange as it had been breezy as we got out of the car. It was so silent that even whispering and our steps in the gravel seemed, pun absolutely not intended, loud enough to wake the dead. Though there were no lights in or near the cemetery, there was enough moonlight filtering through the clouds to allow us to see well. We soon realized we had no idea where the fabled haunted mausoleum was, but kept walking anyway. We made a random left turn, and lo and behold, there it was, about 30 yards or so in front of us. Surprisingly, we had great luck, right? I don't think so. As we approached, I began to feel almost an electric sort of energy in my fingers and hands, but I wrote this off as just nerves or something due to breaking the law. We reached the tomb, and this thing is absolutely huge. It was easily twice my height, at the very least, and made of weathered gray stone with moss and lichen growing sparsely on it. We stare at it for a moment, and Emma whispers, "You should touch it." Being the big bad ghost hunter I am, I oblige. There is really nothing remarkable about the cool roughness of the stone, so I decide to take it a step further and hop up to sit up on the lip of the curved top of the thing. Again, nothing happens, so I jokingly whisper shout, "If there's anyone here, any spirits or anything, come on out." After listening in silence for a second or two, I think, F it, and make my way to the very top where the kid is rumored to have been pushed off by ghostly hands. I have Emma snap a photo or two of me before climbing back down. Slightly disappointed by the lack of spooky encounters, we agree to head out and are about to do just that when we see a pair of headlights slowly creeping down the road that borders one side of the graveyard. We immediately assumed someone noticed us and called the cops, so we crouched down behind some bushes with the mausoleum directly to our left. Both of us are completely silent except for our breathing as we watch the vehicle slowly make its way down the street. I am watching its tail lights turn the corner when I hear a low, creepy, menacing laugh coming from right behind me. It sounded so strange, like it was a few feet away but also right in my ear at the same time. I'm freaked out, and I'm about to chalk it up to adrenaline-induced hallucination, when Emma, who is standing to my left, whispers, "Hey, did you hear that?" My blood ran cold, as I slowly nod a silent, "Yes, I did." I cautiously turn my head to one direction, and try to see if I can hear it. I kid you not. I didn't hear anything, but what I did see was a dark figure stand up from behind one of the headstones not 10 feet away from us. I scream bloody murder, and somehow end up on the ground as the next thing I know Emma is pulling at my arm shouting, "We have to run! We need to get out of here, come on!" I let her pull me to my feet and lead me blindly by the hand. We are full out sprinting, tripping over gravestones and plants and who knows what else in the dark. We cannot even find the exit in our panic. We finally reach a gap in the fence and I can feel the tears streaming down my face as I run for my life down the middle of the road, not even paying attention to the oncoming headlights until I nearly run into them. Luckily it was the car containing the rest of our friends, and we rip the door open and throw ourselves inside screaming, "Go, go, please just drive," before we even bothered to sit in an actual seat or shut the door. I cannot for the life of me remember who was driving, but I think our panic and terror shook them enough that they did exactly what we asked of them and sped away back to the bar. They kept asking us what happened and if we were okay, but we would not calm down enough to answer them until we were back inside the bar and sat down. Still shaking and out of breath, we recounted our story to all of them, drunk parents included. I think a lot of them were skeptical, and honestly, I would have been too if I had not experienced it myself. In the weeks that followed, I felt the same eerie energy the boys in the legend describe hanging over my head. Personally, I attribute it more to paranoia after being scared out of my mind by something I could not actually see, but it made me feel uneasy nonetheless. It has been a few years since this happened, and I still cannot think of a single, logical explanation for what actually happened that night. While I have no idea how credible anyone else's reported experiences on this show are, I know we were without a doubt the only people in that graveyard or even on the streets for that matter, and we would have heard someone trying to sneak up on us. The sound of that laugh was so unnatural. I cannot get it out of my head. Even now, I have never been more scared than I was that night, and I now know what people mean when they talk about not being able to fully believe in the paranormal until you have experienced it firsthand. Anyway, I just thought I would share this experience with you. I hope you enjoyed it. I have been a paranormal investigator since 2005. I started this because I've always been fascinated by the paranormal, not because I've had many experiences that I can remember. So, I was a bit skeptical of most people claiming to have ghostly encounters, although I do have an incredibly open mind. When I first started out, I took some classes on learning what to do. At the end of the series of classes, our instructor, a man named Neil McNeil, took us to an amazing town called Port Gamble, Washington. The last day of the class, we got to investigate an abandoned mansion called the Walker Ames House. This house is beautiful, but it has not been lived in for decades. The town keeps it up as much as they can for special events, etc., but it is not up to code to have anyone live in it permanently. Neil told us the history of the house and the ghost stories. In my mind, I was thinking this was just going to be a fun night exploring an old historic lumber mill home. I did not think that it would change my life forever. As I said, at the time I am a full skeptic. My mind cannot easily be changed or fooled by people. I must see things for myself. There were 6 of us in the house that night. Neil split us up into 2 groups. One group went down to the basement and we stayed on the 2nd floor. He had just warned us to stay out of this little hallway by the attic door. It was between the bathroom and the landing, because he was feeling a strong presence there of something evil. In my mind I thought, sure you did, sarcastically, and walked to a far bedroom. I heard him in another room answering questions of another investigator, but when I came out, I saw his shadow in the hallway, the little hallway he told us not to stand in. As I started to walk over there to see what he was doing, the shadow quickly came toward me and disappeared. I stood there staring for just a second and was kind of stunned. I still heard Neil and the other person talking, but the shadow was gone. I could not process it. I went around the corner and saw them talking in the little room right around the corner of the bathroom. I interrupted them. Who was just standing in the hallway? I said it way too loudly. Neil looked at me for a second, and then said, June, no one was standing in the hallway. I replied, no, someone was standing in the hallway. I saw their shadow and it's gone now. He looked at me and smiled and asked what the shadow looked like. I saw a dark black shadow. It looked a little short, thick in the middle and bald with a round head. It was still light outside, but the sun was setting, and all the shadows were elongated. This one was standing straight up and down. I even went downstairs outside and found a leaf and tore it down and made it into the shape of a person, to put it up to the stained glass window just in case it was natural. And nope, it wasn't. I was at a loss for words. When finally I could not come up with an explanation for it, Neil told me, unbeknownst to me, several people had seen shadows of people upstairs and several people reported seeing a shadow of a short, fat, bald man. I was not the only one. At that moment, while he was telling me this, we heard a yelp from the stairway. Another person coming up the stairway said she swore that she just saw the shadow of a person running across the landing and it disappeared. After that night, I realized I was hooked forever being a ghost hunter.
Ghost, Lions, and Bears by Lutwaffle. I've always had kind of an interest in the unusual. I won't get into the aspect of that if you want things to sound more true. Your mind tends to make it more accurate without it. But I'm far more a believer in the supernatural now than when I was growing up. Growing up, I always thought there was something more than life, as we know it and understand it. But I wasn't sure of what. I have only encountered 3 that I can't explain, not for a lack of trying. 2 were spooky and mysterious, and 1 was sheer absolute inducing terror. I'll save the best one for last. However, about 20 years ago, I was fresh out of high school and wondering what to do with my life. While I was always in above-level classes in high school, mentally, I couldn't wrap my head around college at the time. My circle of friends and I were in the same boat. One day, we decided that we were tired of just sitting around until the wee hours of the morning playing Halo 2 and drinking Mountain Dew. Someone brought up the idea of seeing some haunted locations around Houston, where we all lived at the time. We probably went on over a dozen excursions to various places. Old sanitariums, slave cemeteries in the middle of the dark woods, and I think we even went to a few reportedly old indigenous burial grounds. Of all these adventures, only 2 yielded encounters I couldn't immediately explain. The first time was an old abandoned house. The story, as it was reported to us, exactly how I don't know because at the time, it was at least 50 years prior, and the internet was as robust and crazy as it is now, was as follows. A man and his family had about 5 acres of land, and an up-and-coming suburb outside of Houston that at the time was a decent way outside of town. He and his wife had a lovely little 1-story house and began to develop their property into a subdivision. Suddenly, and unexpectedly, his wife became very ill and ended up passing. This broke the husband. So, the night after his wife's passing, he woke up his 8 kids one by one, took them out to the pool, and drowned them before ending his own life. I've tried to look up the story, but I don't know where to start and haven't found much. But all I know is that we saw something strange when we went there. The property was now surrounded by a chain link fence and secured with a lot. As a group of teens and young 20-somethings, we decided it would be a good idea to break the lock and check it out. The house is in the center of the property towards the front, maybe about 200 yards from the fence line. As we walked about 100 yards towards the house, we noticed a faint glowing orange light on the other side of the property from where we entered. It looked to us like a lit cigarette. We quickly did a head count to ensure everyone with us didn't run ahead, as most of us smoked back then. We were all still together, and everyone was accounted for. Then as we turn our attention to the light, it starts moving. It looked as if someone had a lead cigarette in their hand, and they were walking, swinging their arms back and forth in a natural motion as they stepped forward. Being young and naturally still thinking we were invincible, about half of us started walking faster towards the light. We were maybe about 20 yards from intersecting the path the light was going on when it suddenly vanished. We quickly made our way back to the position that we had seen the light. When we got there, we could easily see the rim of a pool that had since been slowly filled in with earth. We all started trying to theorize and explain what the light could be. I borrowed my dad's camcorder, so we tried to get it on film. The best thing we could come up with was maybe it was a firefly. But I spent plenty of time growing up in the country, and I know what fireflies look like. They don't move in a pattern. They kind of just do their own thing for about 100 yards or so, and then blink away, and then you'll see them again a few feet away. It also happened to stop at the pool where the man supposedly drowned his children. We decided that we would still continue to explore the house. Once we got to the place, we saw that people used it to party, hang out, or whatever else. There were lots of tags and graffiti on the wall. We started poking around with our flashlight, so we came to one of the rooms in the back. I should mention that this was early fall, maybe September or October, which in this part of the state still feels pretty much like summer, like lots of the rest of the country. It wasn't oppressively hot, but it was by no means cold. We had explored every room in the one-story house until this one we entered. Immediately upon entering the room, the temperature seems to dive at least 20 or 30 degrees. I know that sounds dramatic, but we all noticed this at the same time, and without prompting, all said the same thing. Then we saw in the back corner of the room a very much tattered and dirty-looking stuffed animal. We came up with the only conclusion we could have, that this must have been one of the children's room. We all thought that was crazy and turned around and left the room. As soon as we walked through the door, the cold sensation immediately stopped. The only thing we had gone to explore after this was the basement. I might also add that it's scarce to have a basement down in this area. The stairway was enough for only a few of us to get down at a time, so I and 2 others went down first. It became apparent that the basement held about 2 or 3 feet of water. We stopped about halfway down the stairs and started looking to see what we could see with our flashlights. All the while I was recording, we all stopped and looked at each other in horror. The 3 of us could all hear what sounded like someone wading through the water. It didn't sound like something on 4 legs or something that was swimming. It sounded like someone was strolling through the water. We bolted back up the stairs, rounded everyone up rather quickly, and got the hell out of there. The ritual was that after we had been done exploring for the night, we'd meet up at my friend's apartment. I'd hook up my camera to his TV, and we would watch the tape back. We started reviewing the footage. There wasn't really much to see, and most of what we experienced didn't seem to get documented on the camera. But there's a part where you can hear us going down into the basement. Once we started hearing a sloshing sound though. We didn't notice this when we were there in the moment, but the camera caught waves of something coming from the back corner that we couldn't see in the flashlight or on the camera. That freaked us out even more, and we were all left wondering, what the heck are we seeing? What did we experience? The only other adventure that we went on where anything mysterious happened had another tragic story behind it. This was about an hour outside Houston, and in a little lakeside community called Dayton Lake Estates. A couple was building a lovely little 3-story lake house to live in. The house was probably 90% complete, and the couple could not wait to move in, so they moved in a bit early. Not long after moving in, the wife returns home one day to find her husband in their third-story main bedroom in bed with the neighbor's wife. She probably loses it, grabs their gun, and shoots her husband, his mistress, and then herself. So, when we got back to this house, we first noticed that it appeared to be almost finished, but not entirely. It looked like after the crime scene was cleared, no one ever got around to finishing it, and it had fallen into disrepair. We noted that every one of the windows we saw was shattered and broken out upon entering the house. Outside of the clutter of being in disrepair and probably a few other groups of teens like us using it to party, everything appeared to be how they left it on that fateful day. There was an old hoop-style oversized wicker chair in one corner. There was a console table with an old-style calculator that was probably the size of a typewriter, with a few dishes still in the cabinets. We even found a dirty clothes hamper that had bell-bottoms and disco shirts. It was like an absolute time capsule out of the 70s, when the events were rumored to have occurred. As we were making our way up to the central staircase, we started exploring the rooms as best we could, careful not to fall through the numerous holes and prominent weak areas. The third floor only had 3 rooms. Only one I can guess was another bedroom, a small bathroom, and then the main bedroom where the event supposedly took place. As the cameraman and 3 or 4 others from our group, we were the only ones in the main bedroom. It was almost the same feeling as before. It was noticeably colder in that room. It was a different feeling from our first encounter, though. Breathing became more arduous as you walked into that room. I don't know. I could have just walked into a room full of asbestos for all I know, but it was noticeable. The first thing we noticed was that on the far wall, opposite where the bed would have been, there was a circular rose window. It still had every single decorative pane of glass in it. It was the only window in that house that still had any sort of, I guess, color to it. Everything was discolored from the sun, and this somehow was untouched. Even the one right below it was broken out, and scattered, and looked sun-torn. This happened right around midnight. That night there wasn't much of a moon out, and it was some sort of overcast, and it was very dark. We noticed that the window was glowing. It was faint but noticeable. We tried to explain it away as moonlight or maybe a reflection of light, coming from somewhere around there. The only problem with this is that the only light that we could see was on a house about 150 yards away through a thick layer of trees. With what was essentially zero moonlight, we ruled that out as well. That and the moon was to our backs at this point. The light seemingly emanated from the window itself and pointed toward the opposite side of the road, pretty much right where the bed or the husband and mistress were murdered. At this point, everyone will be clamoring to see this discovery, and people will begin filtering in and out of the room, all reporting similar cold and breathing instances. I was filming the entire time, and we even had someone go outside with a bright flashlight and shoot it up through the window, and we could not replicate the light we saw coming off of it. I was the last one out of that room. About 30 seconds after the last person left, I shut off the camera, and we all go back in our cars and left. In our minds, it was exciting but nothing terrifying. We repeated the ritual of watching the tape upon returning to the apartment. We had documented everything, but when it came to the main bedroom, the light seemingly emanating from that window was barely captured, and everything was black on the tape after that. I don't even understand. You realize sometimes things happen with tape, but this was all too convenient. You can hear my friend, who at the time was the last person in the room, say with me, "Okay man, I'm going to get out of here." He leaves and begins to walk down the stairs. I'm in this room alone for maybe about 30 seconds, like I said, and maybe 4 or 5 seconds after the last person besides me left the room, a small fuzzy green ball of light appeared on the tape. I used this camcorder, so I wasn't probably shaking it. I was all the way pressed against the opposite wall trying to capture the strange light emanating from the rose window the best I could. Suddenly, this fuzzy green dot starts moving about the room. While recording, I periodically peeked around the camera lens to ensure I didn't miss anything, and I never saw this little green fuzzy light floating around. No one was in the room with me at that time. This was before cell phones were a big thing, so people didn't carry around something that was made like that. It also seems to float around the room in an ethereal type way. That combined with the fact that the house is ancient, and anyone's footsteps in the creaking boards would have been captured by the camera. That was another head-scratcher that left all of us wondering. We went out of there a couple of times before we actually gave up, and eventually ended up all kind of breaking up as a group and going our separate ways. You know, life happens. But those were just teasers. The natural, terrifying thing happened to me about 3 years ago before this. My family was active in Boy Scouts, and we made it a yearly summer trip to Philmont Scout Ranch. It's a fantastic and lovely area right outside of Samarin, New Mexico, in the northern part. Right at the start of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, because that's not ominous sounding at all or anything. There's usually a 2-year waiting list to be able to do a 14-day trek through the mountains there. But I lucked out. My dad would go to training and sometimes run training classes up there, so I got to go on a shorter 10-day trek through the mountains every summer. This is about our 3rd or 4th year going up there. The sceneries are unique, and backpacking through this area is a beautiful experience. We had left a staffed camp the day prior and would spend the night at a primitive camp. Now the ranch is set up in the western and central areas, and all the trails are marked with a mix of staffed and primitive camps. The eastern region of the farm is entirely without tracks. There are no roads, no people, no anything. Only the rangers and a select few older who are experienced scouts who are allowed to trek through this area, though not many ever do, as it can be dangerous even for seasoned backpackers who go entirely off trail. It's such a big site. We were on day 7 of our trek. We had made it as far north as we could 2 days prior and had begun the journey back to the base camp. We happened to be far east in the central part of the map. We had just come down off a mountain and we were on the easternmost trail. We couldn't believe that we made it to the areas we did, and we stayed at this awesome little area between 2 peaks that had a breathtaking view back to the west of the area. We had just come from an equally fantastic view of the wilderness area to the east. We set up camp with no issues, had dinner, and turned in early for the night. Not long after we all retired to our tents, one of our friends in the tent next to me threw up for whatever reason. It was late and we were all exhausted. The adults were already asleep, and most of us were too tired to really move. It was just the 4 of us who noticed in the tent adjacent to the guy who threw up. We all concluded that it was too late, we were exhausted, and even though it was proper procedure, we didn't feel like hiking over to the bear bag, dropping it, just to store a load of puke. We tossed the bag about 20 feet from the tent next to the tree. We all went back to bed, per usual. We were all waking up before dawn the next day to hit the trail early anyway. A little after 2 in the morning, I woke up and had to go pee. Now, apart from being lazy and exhausted from walking through the mountains, I, again, wouldn't do that the proper way and walk far like I should. I would just go outside of my tent, maybe take a few steps down the hill, and, just let the river flow. This night, my plan was not any different, because I did this all the time. After you hike for miles, then you can tell me about walking even further. But now, I always make a point to do this. As soon as I unzipped the tent, my nose was assaulted with a horrible odor. It smelled like death and bile mixed with sweaty gym socks. I tried my best to not overthink it initially because I knew there was a bag of puke not far away, and I was with a group of hikers who had not really showered in quite some time. I continued to climb out of my tent groggily. I just stood up and was about to take a few steps away and relieve myself on a nearby tree before I could even act. I noticed a big black mass directly in front of me, about 20 feet away. I instantly froze and my gaze was fixed on this object. Before we begin any hike, part of our initial orientation is to go over bear safety. We were all taught the do's and the don'ts of the trail regarding bears and how to avoid encounters with them. This also includes what to do if you are near a black bear at night. It's not really, unheard of for hikers to come across a black bear wandering through their camp in the middle of the night. You get loud, you get big. I start screaming like a banshee and making as much noise as possible to scare it away. Luckily, I didn't panic, and my training instantly kicked in. Very quickly I reacted, I inhaled deeply and began screaming. Then, I froze in sheer terror. As soon as I inhaled deeply, the black mass seemed to notice, but I soon realized that its head quickly turned towards me. My gaze met the most bottomless, piercing yellow eyes I had ever seen. The moon was barely a thumbnail that night, as still low on the horizon and blocked out by numerous trees surrounding our camp, it was pitch black. Enough light to make things out, and not completely black, but it was dark. The yellow eyes seemed to glow. I'm familiar with eye shine, but these eyes seemed to be, well, a light that came from within. It wasn't like it was an eye shine. Instantly, as its gaze fixed directly on me, I got goosebumps, and my hair stood on end. As I stood motionless, transfixed by the glowing set of eyes locked on me, the creature began slowly standing up on its back legs. I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. Instantly, I noticed that the animal was taller than me, maybe 7 feet, perhaps maybe even more. I quickly noticed that this did not look like a bear. I've seen plenty of black bears in real life and have had several encounters with them. None as close as this outside the zoo, but I'm familiar with what a black bear looks like. This was standing fully erect, on 2 legs, and seemed to be incredibly muscular. It didn't have the same awkward slumped posture that a black bear would typically have when standing on its hind legs. This terrified me even more. What the hell am I looking at? We stood there for an eternity. Both of us, our eyes locked on each other. It was probably only less than 30 seconds. It then begins to raise its arms out from its body and look towards me. It was then at that time I noticed that there were claws. They were easily 3 inches in length, and it was utterly terrifying. But worst of all, they appeared to be coming from what I can only describe as human-like hands. Even now, as I'm reflecting on the incident, I get chills all over my body. I stood there, transfixed on this creature that was now looking incredibly menacing, and now like nothing like a bear. I could hear its breathing. It made the sound of a deep guttural growl. Not very loud, but it was more than enough for me to know that this thing did not have good intentions. My mind was in overdrive at this time, picturing all the horrible things it could do to me. Then it took a step towards me. My mind was racing, and paralyzing panic instantly washed over my bottom. I was convinced I was about to die. I had not noticed, but during this time a fellow camper about 3 tents over from mine had also opened his tent and was just emerging to relieve himself. By the way, our tents were all arranged in a loose, spread-out semicircle. His tent at this point would have been looking at the creature in profile. At the same time, I was still in my terror-induced trance, fixated upon this creature. Our fellow camper that had emerged remembered his training and began jumping around and screaming. This creature paused and misstepped for a second, and began the most menacing snarl I have ever seen. Its razor-sharp teeth started to show. This ratcheted up my levels of fear to a soul-wrenching level that I didn't even know was possible. But I was also slightly relieved because the creature's attention had now begun to turn towards this new commotion. Luckily, the rest of my fellow campers instantly knew what was going on and all came out to help us. They began to join the cacophony of noise and were all screaming, yelling, and making absolute barbaric noises to scare off this perceived bear. The last person to emerge from their tents was one of the adults with us. He had brought out an air horn for such an occasion. The next thing I knew, the air horn's deafening blast shattered the moment. The creature suddenly confronted the rest of our crew, and he's a sudden outburst of activity let out a vocalization that I have never, ever, will ever forget. The best I can describe it was like a cross between a lion's roar, a wolf's howl, and a person screaming the noise, all at the same time. It then turned away from the camp and began sprinting away at a speed I have never ever seen. At first, it was on 2 legs, and then after about 20 or 30 yards, it dropped to all 4. The crew continued making noise for quite some time until we saw the creature disappear into the woods entirely. Everyone was checking on each other and making sure everyone else was okay. I was still pretty much dumbfounded from the encounter. Then slowly we began to check our camp. We looked at the sump where we had cleaned our dishes from dinner. We checked the bear bag and deposited the load of puke. We saw nothing that had been disturbed. So after a few minutes, the rest of the crew excitedly discussed the situation, and then everyone returned to their tents to try and grab a couple more hours of sleep before we had to get up and hike some more. I would certainly not be able to get back to sleep that night, and my tent mate just kind of laid there with me. After probably 30 minutes or so, I was laying there staring at the ceiling. My tent mate rolled over and said, still trying to be quiet, whispering to me, "That wasn't a bear, was it?" I just looked at him and said, "No, probably not." Then we just lay there in silence for the rest of the night. After we got up that morning, we ate breakfast and broke camp as usual. We were starting to load up our packs as the sun slowly peeked over the mountain range to our east. Everyone was going about their business, but also, at the same time, looking for any evidence of what had transpired the night before. One of the other hikers said, "Wow, look at this." We had seen a rather intimidating-looking print, probably about 10 feet away from where the creature stood. It wasn't very big, probably average person size, but you can see significant claw marks at the end of its feet. As if I needed any further convincing, this looks nothing like a bear print. At that time, I noticed too that the direction of the image and the path that I can remember the creature taking was directly east towards the wilderness area. The following 2 days were relatively uneventful, and while the rest of the crew would occasionally revel in the crazy events that took place that night, my tent man and I never joined in on the talk. On our last morning, we hit the trail before sunrise. We were only about 7 miles away from base camp. We were hiking down a little dirt road, maybe about 5 minutes left in our hike, when a camp truck passes by, blowing its horn. We all turned around to see a mountain lion scamper off the path into the woods. It had been stalking us for who knows how long. Even that knowledge didn't faze me. I just kept thinking there's a lot worse than mountain lions out here. After a 9-base camp bombarded our buses for 2 days for a ride home, we returned, and our encounter with whatever that creature was basically put into the back of our minds. I'll never be able to really explain what we encountered that night, but I hope you enjoyed my encounters with the paranormal. Haunted School in Box Hill by Tyrese. I would like to remain anonymous for obvious reasons, but you can call me Tyrese for the story's sake. I'm a 15-year-old boy from Melbourne, Australia. I love the outdoors, such as biking and scootering and bushwhacking and hiking and all that good stuff. I'm an absolute sucker for urban exploration, though. Before I get into the story, I would like to say that I'm sorry for what I did, and while nobody was hurt, it still wasn't safe and it wasn't good in any way, shape, or form. The story starts on the 15th of May 2022. I searched an abandoned building in a facility in Melbourne when I came across a school in Box Hill. It had been left for years, so my mates and I hopped on the train, and then from the train station using Google Maps, we rode our bikes down the street to a patch of land with a huge basketball court at the back of the school. From there we hid our bikes and snuck through a hole in the mesh fence. We weren't the first visitors. We made our way through all the swampy grass up to the school hall and substantial indoor basketball court. Let me bring you through a little bit of the layout of the school hall. Underneath the considerable basketball court are locker rooms and bathrooms, and above the indoor basketball court are classrooms, staff rooms, and a cafeteria. As we made our way up the first floor, it was completely flooded and stank, mold growing everywhere. It was a health hazard all around. Then we started going up the stairs to the basketball court where there was this weird and ominous feeling. It's hard to explain, but it was getting a little bit weird. Now, there were dozens and dozens of Asian tea bottles scattered everywhere over the basketball court. Then we walked across to a set of doors in the cafeteria, and when we went in, it just stank like death and rotten meat. And there was all this weird liquid on the cafeteria floor that looked like old blood or something of the sort. So I didn't stick around to find out what it was for very long. My memory of the whole thing is a bit foggy, and I'll try my best to keep going. We were exploring some of the staff rooms and classrooms when I walked outside to a balcony to get some air and eat. And that's when all of my mates abandoned me. I was left alone most of the time when I was there. They left the school hall and moved on to the other part of the school, so I went to the reception building looking for them. I was there for quite some time, just getting bored without my mates. When I left the reception and went into the main student room block, this is where I got a brief interaction with my mates. They asked if I was the one writing things on the old dusty desk back in the other school hall, and I said no. I didn't even know why they'd think that was me. They told me they found very fresh writing on the desk at the school hall that definitely wasn't there before, and I think I said something along the lines of, "That's a bit sus, man, I don't know. It definitely wasn't me though." And then they ran off and didn't think much of it. Once again, there are a lot of blurs looking back on this. I don't remember precisely when, but one of my mates and I found each other again, and were looking in the same direction when we were chatting, and had seen a white mass go straight past a doorway in front of us. We checked it out and asked if anyone was there, and didn't find anything. So we kept going, but on high alert, knowing we had just seen a ghost. I'd split up again in the room blocks when I came across a roll of cotton and papers, a cloth that I don't know why I did it. Still, I guess it was just caused by boredom, but I felt like something had taken over my mind, and I had this immense urge to just light it on fire. So that's precisely what I did. I lit it up and walked off as nothing had happened. A little while later, the fire started getting out of hand, and I snapped back into the reality and came in to ram it and try to put it out. Still, nothing would work. I was so high on adrenaline at this point, and this primordial thing came out of me, and I was like, F it, I'm out of here. I called my mates' names and rounded them all up, and we dipped out of there so fast and went to the skate park across from the school, acting like we had nothing to do with the raging school fire across the block. The whole time I was at the skate park, I was shaking like a junkie high on meth, watching all the fire trucks and cops show up and go in straight past us, rushing to the fire that was now literally exploding. It was an otherworldly sight. We all went home that night as if nothing had ever happened, and I just feel bad. Even though nobody got hurt, and now that haunted and downright strange and dangerous building is gone, I just feel like I did something terrible, and I know I did something terrible. But perhaps there's more to what actually happened. What do you guys think was roaming the halls of that school? One Summer Night by Michael F. One summer night, I was around 19 years old. I was living in a small town named Hedgeville, West Virginia. It's a very small town where everyone knows everyone. I grew up on the only block in the city. Me and my best friend Jonathan. Anyways, I'll never forget this night. I get goosebumps, and my eyes start to water when I tell it. I begin to feel anxious as well. But I was just hanging out with my friends in town, in the church parking lot because it was behind my friend Jonathan's house. I no longer lived beside him. I ended up moving to Allensville Road, so I had to walk about 1.5 miles to get there to hang out with my friends. I've made this walk 1,000 times, but this night would be different. It was insanely quiet. Now, once you pass the middle school and go around the curve, it gets dark because there isn't much light unless the moon is out, and it was a full moon this night. Anyway, I looked over my shoulder multiple times that night. I was having weird feelings, like something was different. It just was weird. Anyway, I make it to Allensville Road. I think I'm almost there. I make it around the first turn and it goes into a holler, and I get to the part where you can look left and see in this field, and I heard a bunch of branches breaking. I looked over and watched, and what I saw freaked me out so bad. I saw something jump out of a tree into the air and shot up into the night sky. It looked like it was about 7 to 8 feet long, with a wingspan of 6 feet or more. It was flying right over me. It had yellow eyes that pierced my soul. It felt like as it was flapping its wings, I could hear the noise it was making. I ran as fast as possible, and it chased me the rest of the way home. I make it home, I go inside and tell my girlfriend at the time what happened. I kid you not, 20 minutes later as we're lying in bed, the trailer we lived in at the time sat about 5 feet off the ground. There is only one tree in the back side. For about 5 minutes we could hear scraping sounds across the side of the trailer. I truly think it was the Mothman. but I've only ever really heard these stories from the Point Pleasant area. This was a bit more humanoid, though. I don't even know how to explain it. Has anybody else in the swamp ever experienced this? I've been a fan of the channel for a while. I've always wanted to share a story but can never think of a specific one to tell. Growing up as a Pentecostal Christian, I've seen a lot of stuff that might be interesting to people. These are a few of the stories. My church would have this yearly trip to towns close to the border with Haiti. I'm not going to speak of the practices of the Haitian community since I'm not Haitian, but I will talk about my own country. Many of these towns near the border are known for witchcraft and practices tied to the devil or demons. My church would go to these places because of the poverty found there, and we would give them food, clothes, and medicine. And every night there would be a service in a public park, also to show them the gospel of Jesus. During these services, weird things would happen. One time during the service at night, an old lady tried convincing my brother to follow her. Throughout the night, she kept looking at him and talking a few times, promising to show him something awesome. Later, we found out from the locals that she was a local witch. Another time during a service, this guy who was apparently demonically possessed fell to the ground and started moving like a snake, literally acting like he was a snake. One of the experiences still fresh in my memory was when a demon-possessed person punched the preacher. The person was saying things like, "I am the devil," and the preacher asked her if she wanted to be free. She later punched the preacher and had to be held by 4 men. This lady had inhuman strength, because barely all 4 of them could hold her. I'm not sure if this story should be considered paranormal or whatnot. What I saw was confirmed. The reason it happened, some people say it was drugs, other people will tell you it's demonic possession, but I'll let you guys argue that on your own. These were a few weird experiences I've had over the years in the church. Howdy, Swamp Dweller. My name is Colton. I had shared a few previous stories with my encounters with wild boars. I wanted to say thank you for sharing that story. My dog May passed away from old age about a week after you posted it, so listening back to it again reminded me of her. She was truly an amazing dog, and I hope she rests in peace. Anyway, I had mentioned having experienced other weird things around this part of Central Texas, so I thought I'd share another post. This story, or report, is more on the side of the paranormal and just overall scary. I have more than just these, which I can submit later, but let's get into this one first. For context, this story takes place in Temple, Texas, at a mall. I used to work there, and many people even today know who I am because everyone knows I am a bit of a character. These stories come from my old co-workers and other people working in the mall. I'll try to keep it as organized as possible. To put it short, the mall is haunted by a poltergeist or a demon, and her name, as we will call her, is Matilda. She's not necessarily mean, just a scary prankster who goofs around a lot. I'll start where I used to work, a trampoline park inside the mall with pizza and arcades. Working there was fun because you can have fun if no one shows up, which happened every so often. We'll start with H, my old boss, who was a lovely middle-aged woman. Now H worked in that part of the mall since it was a Spirit of Halloween shop. Perfect, right? Anyway, she told me one day she came to work about 2 hours early and it was still dark. She wanted to set up a few extra things early so they could prepare the kids. She walked in and my boss saw this woman. She was dressed in a white dress, hair like the ring over her face, just standing there. When my boss saw this, she said, "Not today," and just walked out and waited for the sun to come up before doing anything further. Kind of funny, I guess. Later that year, I joined the crew, and more stuff started happening there. One day, an alarm was tripped late in the evening just after we left for the night, and my boss went back to find a door which was always locked blown open to the outside. She was initially scared, thinking a homeless person had broken in and had probably still been in there with her. She locked the door and checked the cameras. When she did, she scrolled to the point to where the door opened and watched it burst open like something from the inside rammed the door. This feat would be tough for any one person. no matter how yoked they were. But it was done so fast and done quickly that it was not humanly possible. The worst part about all of this is that no one came in. No one was there. No one went out. And then a few seconds later, after the door was open, a couple of floating orbs drifted around the camera before disappearing entirely. We immediately knew it was Matilda, and this is when I began believing something wasn't so normal here. So I tempted fate and called for her. Something is threatening about a powered-down arcade. Just the occasional colorful late flicker, a little chime in the darkness, and the thought that it is supposed to be lit up but isn't. It's weirdly scary, and oddly uncomfortable. I went with my manager and a coworker. We will call my manager Dee and my coworker Jenny. Jenny was a 19-year-old female and Dee was a 30-year-old male. We walked out after everything had closed and we looked at the gate. My boss and manager told me about Matilda and that you could sometimes hear her running down the mall halls past the entrance and sometimes even hear her scream. I was curious, so I walked with them to check it out. As we walked and talked, my manager and coworker suddenly stopped, and the air became increasingly cold. Then, out of the peripheral of my eye, I saw a white glow. I turned to look, but the light seemed to run away, if that makes sense. Was I beginning to wonder about it? It happened again in the other direction, causing me to spin a little. I kept trying to see this glow, but it stayed just out of sight. I decided it may have been my mind playing tricks on me, so I just kept walking for a few more feet. Then something out of a horror movie happened. It was fall time, and there was an issue with the AC at the time that would cause the dew in the air to make a mist that would fill the inside of the arcade. This made it even more creepy, of course. When I noticed this, my coworkers asked,
"Hey guys, have you seen some flashing in your peripheral? Like white or something like that?"
My manager and I, both surprised, said, "Yeah," and we both seemed happy we weren't crazy. Then I swear I heard a little laugh up ahead of us. She was messing with us. We walked back, locked up, and we all agreed we had met Matilda. About a month later, I walked there by myself and came running back after hearing her running around the arcade. I returned with a group to ensure it was not a kid, and we found nothing. Then I got to experience my first physical contact with her. I was making a pizza, and it was a busy day. I had other orders being made and ready to go while making this one as well. I was running the kitchen solo, but I was fast enough to handle it, and the kitchen wasn't big enough to make it too hard. I had just tossed some buffalo chicken and used tongs to do so. I set them on the counter and finished my pizza when suddenly I heard the tongs hit the wall and scuttle across the floor, like they were thrown. But I was the only one in the kitchen. I looked around to make sure that it was just me, and then I ran out. And everyone at the concession had left to sing happy birthday. It was just me and me alone. I then felt like I had company, but I returned to work. About an hour later, I still felt uneasy, but luckily the rush of people had died down and it was a bit slower. Again, I was making another pizza, and then I felt something cold on the back of my neck. It wasn't a hand or anything, but more like a presence. I turned and no one was there, so I ignored it and said, "Not now, Matilda, I'm busy." I know it sounds funny, but spooky stuff felt almost every day at this place, and no one had ever been hurt before. So I wasn't scared of her because I didn't think she wanted me to be. Then, something remarkable happened. I have thick wavy hair, so I had a hairnet on. As I made the pizza, I felt something tug at the hairnet, like it was being dragged off. I stopped and sat straight up, and it was already about halfway off. So I slapped the top of my head to grab the net, and anyone who could have been pulling it reared around with the back hand flowing about eye level with me. I never fight, so I got spooked to swing. But again, no one was there. I ran out and no one was at the concession again. A lot of people went home. I was alone again, but also not alone at the same time. That was my last interaction with Matilda, but the sightings and weird things still happened to people employed there. About a year later, many people quit, and a vast hiring event brought many more in. I swung by the other day, introduced myself to them, and asked if they had seen anything weird, and told a couple of my stories. They said they all still had experienced the same things. So, in the mall in Temple, Texas, something is as playful as she is mysterious. If you see something in there, Don't be scared. She may be playing a game with you. Hey Swamp Dweller. I know you're tired of reading stories about skinwalkers and other related things, so I decided to share a story I think you'll enjoy reading. Thanks so much if you choose to narrate it. Let's say I seem to have an incredible knack for encountering the supernatural. Late in December, I was going to visit my girlfriend's family for the holidays, so I could get introduced to her extended family. There was a snowstorm, so my family decided to stay behind and meet with me the next day. On the way to my girlfriend's hometown, I heard a loud thud on my car roof. I usually would dismiss it as a branch falling on my car or something, but this was unusually loud. As soon as the storm calmed down, I pulled over and checked out what had happened. To my surprise, I saw a significant dent on the roof of my car. As you can imagine, I was shocked and puzzled. With a touch of annoyance, considered that this would cost a lot to repair. Then I noticed a blood trail that led from the top of my roof into the woods. I grabbed a flashlight and a pistol, which I took with me just in case some thug tried to mug me or something, before heading into the woods. After following the blood trail, I saw some gigantic moth-like creature that was at least twice the size of myself. My entire body went pale white as soon as I saw this thing. I was too scared to raise my gun. As soon as it turned around in my direction, I fell back in fear, dropping my gun and flashlight, which still illuminated the creature. Oddly enough though, it didn't attack. It just went back to trotting around. It seemed to be trying to treat its wound. I snapped out of my fear-induced trance and figured that if I helped this thing, maybe I could get on its good side, which in all honesty was a stupid move, but I'm alive so I guess it doesn't matter. Now I ran back to the car trying to find my first aid kit inside that I took with me just in case anyone got hurt. I never thought I would use it to help a monster. I ran back to where I saw the creature only to find that it was gone, but it seemed like it had left a message clawed into the dirt.
Protect your ill or his life will be lost.
At first I was dumbstruck, but then I remembered that my girlfriend's grandfather was very sick. How on God's earth would this thing know that though? Now that I think about it, maybe it wasn't an accident that it landed on my car. Instantly, I grabbed my flashlight and gun and ran back to my car at full speed. I was horrified and confused as to what had just happened. My mind was asking so many questions at once. What was that thing? Why did it write that warning? Why didn't it attack? My mind was so all over the place, I almost crashed twice, but eventually I did make it back to my girlfriend's house. When I saw her, she was as beautiful as ever, but that's beside the point. She saw that I was shaken up, and I was fearful in my face, before asking me what was wrong. I told her that if I told her she'd think I was crazy or messing with her, and she responded, "Well, I don't have a reason to think that now." So I told her what happened. Something odd happened when I told her, though. Instead of her laughing or telling me that I was the best liar she had ever talked to, she had the same horrified expression when I came across the creature. I asked her if she was okay. She snapped out of her horror-induced state, hugged me, and asked me what I knew about this creature. I didn't know much. I gave her the best description I could about what I saw, and she told me the legend about this thing called Mothman. It said that this thing is some sort of omen, a warning of downright terrifying things. It's said to show up around the time that natural disasters and other things happen. I then asked my girlfriend what we should do. She suggested that we keep this between us and keep in touch with her grandfather, which was hard to do consistently since he was in intensive care, but I agreed with her anyway. The next few days were uneventful regarding strange or downright terrifying things. I did hear branches snap a couple of times outside the guest room I was sleeping in, but in all honesty, that was probably just birds or squirrels or something like that. If it were a so-called Mothman, he would have made a lot more noise, I assume. I want to take a moment to mention that the next part of this story is not for the faint of heart. But if you're ready for it, then so am I. So on the third day I spent at my girlfriend's house, we got a call from one of her grandfather's caretakers urging my girlfriend and her parents to come to the hospital as quickly as possible. I offered to go with them, and since there was no time to waste, they agreed and took me in their car. When we reached the hospital, the doctor took us to the room where my girlfriend's grandfather was being taken care of, and I immediately regretted coming in when I saw it.
His heart had ripped out of his body, and his ribcage was showing. I felt so weird, like I was about to cry and throw up simultaneously. But I somehow held my stomach together. Afterward, I had so many questions. Part of me wanted to hunt down whoever did this. I am uncomfortable sharing how I felt in extended detail because honestly, I was just distraught. I will, however, share something that happened after Christmas. So after my girlfriend paid for my car repairs, bless her soul, I was heading back to my family's house when suddenly I saw something flying overhead. Something huge. I immediately pulled over and ran after it, which might have been a stupid move, but again, I'm alive. I ended up at the same spot I encountered the Mothman the first time, and wouldn't you know it, there he was on a vast branch looking at me. I was shaking in my boots, but I also had a sense of anger in me. I asked the creature a straightforward question. Did you kill him? The beast looked away and down onto the ground. It had a look on its face that resembled sorrow. Before I could ask him another question, it flew away, leaving behind a few feathers from its massive wings. I never thought to pick one up, though. I should have. As you can imagine, I had so many questions and so did my girlfriend. The police were never able to find who or what did it. Do I blame the creature for this? Not really. After researching the Mothman, it doesn't seem like a creature that kills humans. Whatever this thing was, I hope it's still alive. Hello, Swamp Dweller. Last year, I think I may have seen what you would call a not deer. This is not necessarily a terrifying story, but it's very odd and something I think would fit your show. I am an avid hunter and usually hunt with a bow in the woods behind my house. There is a massive and non-typical buck that I am still after today. Anyway, I was sitting on a fallen tree hidden by bushes with enough space for my arrow to go through. I was sitting there waiting for a deer to come by. I had just texted my dad telling him there was no sign of deer except for a trail. That day was a tranquil one, with the occasional bird chirping here and there. So what I heard next was very out of place. I heard something weird, some sort of heavy footstep. I just then listened to a kind of deer, elk, hog, bear, grunt mixture. I don't even know how to explain it. It was so loud. I could feel it in the ground. It rattled my bones. It rattled the trees. It sounded like it was right behind the tree I was. I texted my dad, and he told me to prepare my arrow. I put a hand on my bow and got ready. I saw something moving. It didn't look quite right. This animal, or not animal, whatever it was, saw me and ran away. And that's when I noticed that it had the head of a deer at the very least. I haven't seen the same one since, but that doesn't mean it's the last one like it. I was riding in the van with my mom and dad one day. We were heading home from school as I had finished my midterm exams. We passed a field with grass that was not very high, maybe ankle height. I had a weird urge to investigate the area, and there was a deer there. Except, once again, this deer was strange. It was red-orange with a fox-like tail and bony legs that were way too long. It almost had a mane. It had a deer body, neck, and head. The build of the deer thing would have been closer to a doe than a buck. I could feel the color go out of my face, and I turned to my mom and dad and told them what I had seen. My dad seemed to believe me, but my mom not so much. This was not the scariest story, but it is weird and something that needed to be shared. I know I sound crazy, but I swear I'm not. Thank you for reading my story if you do. Be safe out there. Things can definitely be a little weird sometimes, and you may not notice everything from one quick glance. Last year in the fall of 2021, my friend and I decided to explore the old church I live next to. I was 16 years old and my friend was 15. For reference, my dad is the pastor of that church and my family and I live in a small house about 100 yards away. Our church is a little over a century old, and I've always suspected that it might be haunted. I'm not a skeptic nor an avid believer, but I always try to see the reasoning on both sides. I suppose you could say that I am an open-minded skeptic when it comes to just about anything. Anyway, my friends, who we will call Tricks for privacy reasons, were hanging out at my house. We eventually grew bored and decided to explore the church at around 9 p.m. I couldn't have Tricks stay overnight because my mom was very strict about that, so we had to make it short and sweet. We got a flashlight and I used my iPod to record and use its flashlight as well. We didn't think we would find anything, but now we were on edge because of the atmosphere the old building provided. Nothing really eventful happened, but we still had that eerie feeling the entire time. Trix thought she heard a noise a few times, but I never heard anything. After our quote-unquote investigation, we went back to the house to watch the recording. Nothing really stuck out until I noticed a faint silhouette of a man down the stairs in the room across from us. I rationalized it and thought it was probably just a chair or another piece of furniture. However, the figure was gone when the camera panned the next time over to that area. At first, I figured it was just a different angle from the first time when I screenshotted all 3 frames and compared them. I realized all were about the same angle. I thought it was strange but decided not to dwell on it and brushed it all off. Nothing out of the ordinary occurred for quite some time after that, but I witnessed something odd that I couldn't explain. To understand this further, I must explain the layout of a specific church area. The sanctuary and auditorium area is ground level. This is a room connecting to the site with 2 flights of stairs, one going up and one leading down to the basement area. The shadow or figure or whatever it was that I saw previously was in the adjoining room. The video showed us in the adjacent room, about to enter the sanctuary. We were talking about the projector light on the ceiling, unaware of a strange bright orb of light. It didn't look like a ghost orb, but it was relatively bright, like a flashlight reflecting off something shiny. However, the light was gone when we lowered our flashlight beams downward, still oblivious to what we were seeing on the video. The camera was facing and angled in the same position the whole time. I couldn't explain it at all. Nothing else worth mentioning happened for the rest of the video, and although we were slightly unnerved, we chalked it up to our imagination. I would send in the video, but this was several years ago and I have no idea where that iPod even is anymore, unfortunately. We said our goodbyes and Trix went back to her house. Fast forward a few weeks, me and Trix both started noticing strange occurrences in our own houses. Whereas I occasionally had my lights turning on and off, with my mom chastising me for leaving my light on during the day, Trix experienced more than me. We updated each other frequently about the specific paranormal activity in our rooms. We experienced random bruising, lights turning on and off, some scratches, and seeing things from the corner of our eyes. After a few months, I noticed these events were barely happening to me, but Trix was still going through it very rough. We discussed it and decided that it was most likely due to her being more afraid of what it was than I was. And no, I'm not trying to say that I wasn't scared, just not as much. Nothing extreme happened in my story, but it still freaks me out to think about to this day. This first story is actually a personal experience of mine that I've shared in a past episode, but so many of you have recently asked in the comments for me to share it again that I thought I would do so. So if you've heard this and want to skip on to new stories, be sure to use the timestamps in the description and in the pinned comment. I grew up in rural areas my entire life. Whether it was a beef farm in Tennessee or living in the middle of nowhere central Florida, I've done it all. Growing up without access to most commonalities we have all grown accustomed to. Yeah, that's right. We had no internet, no TV, and yeah, you guessed it, no cell phones. I know, the horror, right? I'd think of us as the last actual generation before the internet age. Not to say dial-up wasn't around, but most of us didn't have access to it at the time. But honestly, it wasn't all that nasty outside of the long, dull summer days where we would be cooking alive in the fields. Living out in an old Civil War cabin in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee, shilled out some exciting experiences to say the least. This story will be one of the many I may share if you all enjoy this one. This story starts like any other. It was a typical Friday night, and my brothers and I were all home alone. As we didn't have much of anything to entertain ourselves with, we began playing Manhunt in and around the house. If you don't know, Manhunt is basically a more extreme version of hide and seek, if you will. Most of the time,
We opted to stay indoors as it was pitch black outside. For a bit of context, our cabin was situated on top of a rather steep hill, with a long winding driveway running down it. Our place had a basement level, the main level where most of the house was, and the upstairs that just had my room. We also had a back deck about 10 to 12 feet up in the air, if I had to guess. Anyway, back to the story at hand. It was pitch black outside, and going much further than our front porch at night wasn't something anyone enjoyed doing. The game was fun but monotonous with the little room we had inside to work with. At this point, I had the bright idea to wander off outside and hide on the roof to make the game a bit more interesting. This would soon be one of the biggest regrets in my life. At first, everything seemed fine. It was rather cold as it was nearing fall, and the weather was just starting to change. There was a slight breeze and the air was crisp and calm. After a few minutes of me just sitting up on the roof, something felt off. I had been practically mesmerized by the sounds of crickets and cicadas. I realized, though, that at the time the noise had suddenly stopped. This seemed very odd to me, but at the same time, being as naive as I was then, I didn't really realize that this only meant something terrible was going to happen. I sit there, as still as possible for a moment, trying to listen as closely as I could. I can't hear anything aside from the slight breeze through the leaves. Then as quickly as the silence came, an eruption of noise came from the other end of the roof. For a bit more detail, we had a metal roof at the time, making it very easy to hear when things walk on the roof. It sounded like something had landed on the opposite end of the roof. I looked over, but could see absolutely nothing. This left me somewhat unnerved, and my first thought was to exit the situation. Before panicking fully, I remembered it could be my brothers messing with me, since there was no doubt they would have given up looking for me by now. I opened up my window and called my brothers. They both ran up the stairs shouting and complaining that the roof was off limits. As my oldest brother got to me, I asked him if he had been messing with me and making noises on the roof. He, of course, denied this and wanted to come up and investigate. So he and I slowly make our way to the middle of the roof and listen for a moment. Everything went quiet around us as it had earlier. At this point, I was already on edge and ready to karate chop a demon in the neck if I had to. We heard a pounding noise on the far end of the roof opposite of where we were standing. After what I think were 3 sets of 6 pounding noises, it charged us. Well, I think it did anyway. It sounded like hooves were running across the metal roof, but the only issue was that we couldn't see a single thing. The entire roof was clear aside from us, that is. But somehow, we heard these very, very loud footsteps. It quickly approached us and began circling around us. I held my arms out to try and see if I could feel anything, but I couldn't. The weirdest part was that I could feel the vibrations of the footsteps around us, but could not see or feel anything in the air. These footsteps circled us for many minutes, but were probably no more than a minute or so. It suddenly shifted position, and we could hear the steps trail off the roof and disappear into thin air. We quickly ran inside, locked the windows and doors, and huddled up inside, freaking the hell out. I love studying all things paranormal, whether it's his, kith, and kin, shout out to Brian Kaplan for posting kith and kin here, or true ghost stories. Both Cheryl Hughes and I are also interested in architecture. Naturally, I had toured the Winchester mansion and had a nerdy interest in all things Winchester. Well, my wife surprised me one year with tickets to the Winchester Mystery Tour and the Winchester Explore More Time. The Explore More Tour is for people who have already seen the Winchester tour. It takes you all the way to the off-limits rooms. For various reasons, this tour is not offered often, and they only sell tickets every 10 years. I was elated. I didn't expect to see anything paranormal because I had never actually had a magical experience. When we got there, I was super excited. First, we did the standard tour and had so much fun. I took lots of pictures that day. I'd be happy to post those pictures separately for you all if you were so inclined. But what I want to talk about here is when we did the Explore More tour. We got to see all the rooms that they don't usually see, and it was so fun. It was everything my little heart desired and then some. But then, we went down into the basement, and that's where things got truly weird. Right away I noticed that sometimes pointing my camera at the hallway or barren room would show me a little facial recognition thing, like somebody was standing there.
so my camera was thinking there was someone in front of me. But there wasn't. Well, I wanted to take some pictures of different things, but the rest of the group kept moving, so I admit that I was probably not doing what I was supposed to. But anyway, I found myself standing alone down a dark hallway, taking pictures of invisible people, like you do. Then Cheryl came up behind me and said, "What are you doing?" Looking back, she seemed a bit spooked, but I thought at the time she was just mad because I had gotten separated from the group. I said, "Oh, sorry, was just trying to get a picture. My camera is acting up and saying there's someone in this hallway. I'll go back to the group now." I was really surprised when she said, "No, don't worry about them. Have you been over to that corner yet?" She pointed to a spot where two sorts of walls came together, but they were kind of freestanding. So I think maybe there had been a plan to maybe put a storage closet there or something that hadn't worked out. Anyway, it turned out that Cheryl was just as naughty as me and had also been separated from the group, but she had found herself in that corner, and she said that it creeped her out, so she wanted me to take a picture there. I was excited. I walked over to the corner while she headed back to rejoin the rest of the group. As I got close to this corner, I noticed an unsettling feeling there, like something was just wrong. But I was determined to get this picture for Cheryl, and besides, I was equally determined to not be spooked by anything paranormal. I pointed my camera, and then the camera said there was a person right in front of me. I didn't understand it all. The little face recognition square popped up, and, well, I snapped a picture. Then it suddenly felt cold in that corner, like ice cold. I kind of looked up and around and then shrugged. I didn't see any vents or anything that could explain it. When I turned around, the rest of the group had already moved to the boiler room. I could see a small hallway leading from right where I was standing to where the group was, so I took it. I was in luck. Cheryl was standing right near the exit of the hallway, and I could just go right to her. When I popped out, she looked really startled and confused, then looked back in the direction of the corner and back at me. "Where did you come from?" she asked. I was a little startled because, as I recall, she had asked me to go to the corner. So I said, "The corner? I got the picture you wanted." She looked at me sideways and said, "But how did you get here?" I just pointed and said, "Through this little hallway." She made a little skeptical face, then had me snap some pictures of the boiler room. After that, sadly the tour was almost done. We learned a couple more ghost stories from the tour guides and left. That night, Cheryl and I were at a dinner eating cheeseburgers and said, "Can you draw me a picture of the hallway you were talking about in the basement?" I was a little confused, but I obliged. She looked for several seconds at my crude drawing of the corner and then the hall. Then she said, "Okay, I'm not trying to be weird, but there was no hallway here when I was in that corner." I know because when I was standing there, I felt really creeped out and looked for a way to get away. Anyway, I would have taken that hallway, but it was not there. So we talked for a bit and Cheryl was shaking. I posted that picture I took of the corner to a ghost story page with the story I just shared, and I said, "I don't see anything in the picture, but this corner is where this whole incident took place." That night, we arrived at our hotel for the evening and unloaded our stuff. I checked Facebook and saw that I had a bunch of comments. "Who is this guy standing in front of you?" Or, "Is this fake? You photoshopped that in, right? So lame." One woman said, "Do you really not see the face?" Well, the second picture below is everything other people have seen and were circling things, and I was totally spooked by that. Right in front of me, and right where I was standing with the camera, was someone with an angry-looking face glaring into it. Don't feel bad if you don't see it at first. I didn't either, but it's there. Cheryl says she can't look at this picture because it makes her feel very weird like she did in the moment. And I guess maybe this isn't terribly scary, but that was our experience. Back in the early 2000s is when this story took place. I was married with 3 kids. 2 were elementary aged, and the oldest was middle school age. My then husband had started a new job, and it was the 3rd shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I ended up being the only adult 5 days a week. Everything was great with the kids and us. We were in the middle of remodeling our bathroom. It was gutted to replace everything, including the floor. We had moved into that house in 1998, and no odd or weird stuff happened. I started noticing the 2 youngest kids' room would be a disaster, with toys everywhere. We cleaned every evening, so I fussed at them for getting up and playing. They swore up and down that they didn't do it. If anyone has kids, they will understand that lying is hard for some kids. My youngest would overdo anything if she tried to lie about it, and I could tell that she was not lying. Anyways, cut to a month or 2 later and our bathroom was finished.
Now I need to describe the bathroom layout for this to make sense. The shower and tub is immediately on the left when you walk into the room. Across the tub was the sink. If you walk past both, there was a faux wall between the tub and toilet. It was to hide the bathroom. I was still struggling with sleeping alone. I would get into chat rooms, dial up internet back then, to waste time. Cell phones were minimal, and used for chat and calls. After chatting each night, it would be between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., so I would grab a shower to relax. This gets to the creepy part. Our new shower had 2 curtains, the clear inner liner and the outer fabric. This is essential to the story, I swear. While showering, it sounded like the bathroom door opened. The shower curtains would move from the air, and I could see the outline of a person. I figured when my kids walked in to pee or something. I would call out to them, but get no response. I would peek out past the faux walls and see nobody. The first time it happened, I figured my oldest son was playing a trick. When I checked on the kids, they were all still dead asleep. I took a sleeping pill and went to bed. The next day, I told my husband about the experience, but he just said that I had dreamt it or my Ambien caused a hallucination. Maybe that would have been believable if it didn't happen every night. I began telling people in chat rooms and got dumb responses like, Why shower so late? Has anyone died in your house? Do you have anything secondhand or potentially cursed that you might have bought or brought into the house recently? More people took me seriously than I expected. I doubted my own sanity at this point. So one person in the chat room was from the UK, and we were all online friends. She suggested that maybe something stirred up energy in our house when we remodeled. It did make sense because of the new bathroom. I figured I'd tell my hubby and go from there. Again, he just said I needed to sleep. When your partner doesn't believe you, it quickly turns into a fight, which in turn causes the energy to shift negatively. My youngest child, who can't lie, told me her stuffed toys and Beanie Babies were thrown at her the previous night. I didn't know how to respond or what action to take. I walked in from a quick trip to the market, and my oldest son asked me, "When did you get a cat?" I didn't. He explained that it was in our hallway where the bathroom and 3 bedrooms were. Our house was a 1-story and had a basement. He also said it walked into my then-husband's room. He went to look for it, but never found it. So now, things are affecting my kids. My youngest son told me that he could hear someone talking to him in his ear at night, but could never see anybody. The toys in the living room would get dumped during the night, and my kids were scared. I never told them about my shower visitor because I didn't want to scare them even further. My oldest often would tell us about this cat that he saw multiple times. In 2010, we moved away from that house, but we did still have encounters until we left for good. I had a pervy ghost interrupt my showers 5 nights a week for years. I got semi-used to it. I was also told that from my info I shared that our hauntings were happening during the witching hour. My 3 kids and I moved into a decent place and felt safer. I, however, blessed the entire house, minus the oldest son's room per request not to. I then used salt in doorways and windows. I did not put a line of salt at my oldest son's door. Either we're cursed or something follows us. We heard footsteps on the steps when no one was around them. My oldest son would regret not having his room cleansed or blessed. He said he would wake up in the middle of the night to shadows of something breathing in his ear. One day he said it felt like someone was right beside his ear and took the breath we take when getting ready to scream. It seemed like we were destined to be haunted. But again, nothing that happened would be on camera. We had an old porch upstairs that was made into a room with huge windows. We had a nightlight in one of the outlets, so we didn't have to be blind. My room was across from the nightlight, and it would often go dim and back to normal. We tested it out, messed around, even flickered lights to see what would happen to try to recreate this, and we never could. I think this would be considered a ghost story. So, to start, I would like to specify I consider myself to be a sort of optimistic skeptic. I generally believe there is a rational solution to most things, but I fully acknowledge that sometimes things just can't be explained. I have a story that I think fits that. I live in the Alton area of Illinois. Among other things, it's known for being one of the most haunted places in the world.
I've always wondered how exactly that's quantified, but I digress. I was a freshman in high school when this story occurred. A friend of mine had recently moved to a house across town. My friends and I would often go over to play Xbox and hang out. We always got bad vibes from this new house though. On the main door, going into the house, there were these 3 enormous, what looked like claw marks. I wouldn't say it's connected to the later event, but it kinda set up the vibes of the house. Immediately through the door there was a staircase going to a basement. Right at the bottom of the stairs was a small room. At one point it appeared to have been a nursery. There were some worn spots on the floor, which looked like a crib once sat there, and some childish looking wallpaper scraps on the walls. The stairs led up to the kitchen and living room through the kitchen. The overall layout of the house isn't very critical. It's just important to know so you can see the stairs going to the old nursery from the living room. The house also had an upstairs room, but the way upstairs had a wall blocking it. Old photos of the place showed a staircase going up, but for some reason, by the time my friend had moved in, it was walled off, with no way to get up. And believe me, we looked. I tell you all this because something was wrong about this house. Everything about it just felt off, like there were eyes on you from all sides at all time. My friend who lived there assured me he had never experienced anything out of the ordinary, and that we were being paranoid. At that point, nothing weird happened, so we continued going over and dealing with the odd vibes, until the first time I stayed the night. He was the only one with an Xbox 360 at the time, so we stayed there for the night to stay up late playing Halo 3 on his big plasma screen TV. The night ran on, and everyone else turned in for the night. I stayed up later to keep playing because I wanted to finish the story mode. Eventually, fatigue set in and I finally laid on the couch. After I got situated, I turned the TV off. I was using it for light to find my way around the messy living room. The reflection on the TV standing on the stairs was clear as day. A small boy, shirtless, with tiny pajama pants. He was staring at me through the TV's reflection. I could feel my body immediately heat up. It's heating up a little now, just remembering the event. I blinked a few times and he was gone. I took a second to collect myself and calm down. I shook my head thinking I was tired from playing games. One of my other friends, who I thought was asleep on the nearby love seat, said, "Did you just freaking see that?" I immediately turned the TV back on and we stared at each other. We decided we had to leave. The only problem was that the only way out that wouldn't wake everyone up through the middle of the night was going by the stairs where we just saw the kid. Admittedly, we gathered our stuff, far from gracefully, and bolted out the door with our eyes closed. I unintentionally slammed it shut, and as it closed I could feel my body heating back up, and the feeling of eyes was on me was way more intense than ever. We darted back to my house just a few blocks away. On the way, I had my friend recollect precisely what he saw. To a T, he described the same boy I saw. We never went back to that house. The friend who lived there said we were crazy, but to this day, I swear I saw something that night. I'm sorry if this wasn't the most spooky, scary story, but I hope you enjoy it, because it really did freak me out in the moment. So this happened just the other day. I, my brother, and our mom went for a bite to eat in town about 10 miles away. We had our dinner and made our way home with nothing from the regular occurrence happening. About a couple of miles away from home, we noticed a very tall, dark, slender figure was standing on the white line at the edge of the road near a foggy field. My brother was the first to notice and commented, "What's this idiot doing out in the dark, alone, and standing so close to the road?" When he brought this to our attention, my mom jumped as if she got startled by something and said, "Did you see all those deer?" I glanced to her side of the car and saw at least 24 deer clustered in a tight group, opposite to the unidentified figure. I looked sharply and quickly to the left, where the figure was, and by this time we were passing right by it. I saw what looked like the girl from that movie The Grudge, inhumanly long black hair and ghostly white skin, but no other distinguishing features were present. If I had to guess, I would say that they were at least 6.5 feet tall from head to toe. As we passed, I got the whole up and down spine chills and goosebumps. "What the heck was that?" my brother announces, only quickly followed by my mom stating, "Was that a person opposite the deer just standing there still staring in the darkness? What in the world?"
The creep factor really hit home then. Eventually, we made it back home. A friend of mine sent me a text. "Are you walking around in my yard, trying to prank me?" I reply, "No man, I just got home from dinner with my family." There is a short pause. Then he sends another text. "You need to see what I'm looking at right now." About 15 minutes or so pass and I get a video clip from him, and my blood runs cold. Every hair standing on edge, every sense engaged. It was the same thing we had seen earlier, staring at those deer.